Episode 2, Development. Chapter 6, Programmers Roundtable. California was calling, not just Disneyland, but Silicon Valley. I knew I had to be back in the US to learn what I needed to make it as a programmer. I strongly believe going to college was a necessity. Despite signing letters with John Romero, Ace Programmer, I didn't think I could get a full-time job as a programmer, especially straight out of high school. My parents suggested Oxford and Cambridge, but in my head, all I could think was, I need to make video games and I need to go to college in the US, closer to where this is happening. To me, what was happening in Silicon Valley was massive and the center of the universe. So the logical next step seemed to be to live with my biological dad in Salt Lake City and go to Utah Technical College, now known as Salt Lake Community College. Sure, it wasn't California, but it was college, and it was closer to Silicon Valley than Alconbury. It was a good next step. My mother, Ralph, and I flew back to Los Angeles in the summer of 1985 and celebrated my graduation in Disneyland as planned. Maria, a family friend, lived in LA and put us up. Disneyland was my favorite place in the world. I loved the rides, the junk food, and the illusions that the park created. I was 5 years old the first time I went to Disneyland. I especially remember the Matterhorn, the massive alpine roller coaster at the center of the park. We got on the bobsleds, and as I ascended, I looked down and saw nothing but the beams holding the Matterhorn together. When we reached the top of the ride, the power went out. This was freak-out level scary to a 5-year-old, but it was also cool to be frozen above the park looking into the guts of a non-existent mountain. My 5-year-old brain didn't process this moment as one where the curtain had been pulled back and the secrets of the great and all-powerful Oz, or in this case, Walt Disney, were revealed. That was what took place, though. Not that it made the Magic Kingdom any less magical. Looking back at my younger visits, both as a 5-year-old and as a teen fresh from high school, I wonder, did the park resonate so powerfully with me because everything about it touched on the same elements as game construction or vice versa? Did Disney influence me as a game designer, or did I like it so much because I was one? Every inch of Disneyland is meticulously designed so that visitors have not just a shared experience, but the same experience. Considerable detail and planning go into every aspect of the park to heighten expectations and deliver even bigger payoffs. If the Matterhorn inadvertently opened my eyes to Disneyland's constructed illusions, I saw their mastery when I was older. From the level design of the waiting lines to the colors and shapes of its buildings, the experience design in Disneyland is magnificent. Imagineers, Disney designers, deploy techniques to create illusions. For example, Main Street grows narrower as it nears the castle, making the building seem much bigger than it really is. Meanwhile, the humdrum elements of Disneyland, the garbage bins, the Transformers, and so on, are painted no-see-um green. Why green? The human eye sees more green than any other color, so green is the natural color choice for camouflage. All these elements are important to a game designer trying to design both an illusion and an experience. Decades later, my wife Brenda and I regularly piled the kids into the car and drove 8 hours from our home in Santa Cruz to the Magic Kingdom. For me, each visit became a quest to learn something new about the park. I'd ask cast members questions. What is something about the park or your job that nobody knows? I'd study the level design of a ride, list elements of environmental storytelling, or consider the parallels between NPCs and cast members who provided both information and quests, if asked. I loved learning new things about the park each time we visited. Of course, at age 17, I wasn't exactly thinking about game design or Disney in these terms, but I was still thinking about game design nonstop. With the money I saved, I ordered my own Apple IIe and waited for it to be delivered to Maria's house so I could get cracking. My plan was to take my new machine to Utah, where my father lived. I would enroll in college and begin my ultimate gaming quest, to land a job as a game programmer. After Disneyland, Mom and Ralph went to Tucson to visit family for a few weeks. I stayed behind to work with Maria to earn more money before moving to Utah and starting college, and boy, did I work. If I'd known I was going from living in decent conditions in the UK to state-of-the-art Los Angeles sweatshop hell, I might have looked for other options. I didn't know what I was getting into at her place. Every morning at 6:45, I hopped in the back of her pickup truck, and she drove around collecting her crew of undocumented Mexican immigrants. We'd arrive at our machine shop, located in an industrial complex of many different machine shops, and work until 11 p.m., assembling rivets and clinches. It was brutal work performed in furnace-like conditions. The shop wasn't air-conditioned. I was given a block of metal with 12 poorly drilled holes in it, and my job was to pop rivets into the holes, attach a clinch, and then use a press on every one of them to make them solid. I moved thousands of these pieces every day, non-stop, from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m., and when we got home, there was little relief. Maria didn't have AC there either. I baked in 90-plus degree weather the entire time, trying to communicate in Spanglish with my workmates. The only saving grace of the job was that there was a radio in the shop and the dial was set to KNAC, LA's legendary metal radio station. I couldn't believe bands like Accept, Poison, Motley Crue, and so many others were on the air. It was my one solitary escape. I was so exhausted at the end of the day that I didn't even think of coding. It was hard work and I got paid only in room and board. However, she promised me a few $100 at the end of my time that I could use towards college. All in all, I was happy for the work and glad to be back in the U.S. When Mom and Ralph returned from Tucson, my Apple IIe arrived, and we drove to my mom's friend Opal's home. I was thrilled to leave the sweatshop behind. My mom and Ralph returned to England, and my dad eventually drove from Salt Lake to fetch me, my computer, my clothes, and not much else. I hadn't seen him in about 3 years. He looked a bit older than I remembered, but he was still very much the same guy. Lean, powerful, muscular, well-groomed, even drunk. My father cared deeply about how he looked. It was obvious to both of us that we were on new terrain. We loved each other, but now we didn't really know each other that well. Yes, he was my dad, but I was older, bigger, and smarter. I was no longer just a kid. Like my mother and John Schooneman, my father didn't really care about computers or gaming. He just loved playing pool. So while I could talk to him about my achievements, the games I'd made and sold, and the jobs I'd gotten, much of it was over his head. This was true of most people in the mid-'80s. Computers were typically the domain of researchers, scientists, and some office workers. Electronic typewriters were still the rage. He lived outside Salt Lake City in Midvale with his new wife, Karen, and was now a building superintendent for EIMCO, a large mining operation. He was out of the mines and managing 12 buildings that surrounded them. He was different too. Being surrounded by scientists day in and day out changed his perspective and educated him. Even though he didn't have a day of college in him, he was naturally a curious man who liked to learn and absorb whatever was happening around him. I was given a room in their basement where I set up my Apple IIe on a computer desk, complete with a kneeling chair, the cutting-edge ergonomic furniture of the day. I programmed and bided my time until I could register for school at Utah Tech. Strange as all this was, it was a much better setup than the last time I'd seen my dad, which was the summer of 1982, before we moved to England. Summer vacations in my tweens and early teens with my dad were always fraught. At that time, he was dating a Mexican woman named Frances, who had 3 young kids. They were all living in a trailer, and his idea of childcare was to give me a list of chores to do. I was 14 and bored out of my skull. One day, I found his .22 rifle and started firing it out our window, shooting out windows of neighboring trailers. The cops came, of course, and I lay low as they went around knocking on doors. I didn't answer when they knocked on ours. This is not my proudest moment. One day, we drove out to the desert home of Frances's parents. My dad barbecued and drank while I supervised the kids, Johnny, Dina, and Ronnie. By the end of the night, my dad was loaded, but he packed up his now-empty cooler of beer and ordered me and Ralph to get in the car. Frances and her kids planned to stay behind at her parents'. "Are you sure you can drive, Al?" Frances asked. "Oh, sure, no problem," my dad insisted. We got in the car and drove off. About a mile down the road, he pulled onto the shoulder. "Mijo, sit here in front of me and drive." "What?" "Come on," he said, pushing himself back into his seat. "On my lap. You can drive." Fortunately, I knew how to operate the gas pedal and the brakes because within no time at all, my dad passed out behind me. The tough thing was figuring out how the hell to get back to Tucson on dark roads at 2 a.m. Somehow, I remembered and guessed my way back, surprised that I recognized major streets. At one point, we came to a big intersection with a Church's Fried Chicken place on the far left corner. As a rookie driver, I was in the wrong lane when I realized I needed to make a left. I was waffling in no man's land, and the car pointed towards the fast food joint. I don't know where I'm supposed to turn, I yelled, panicked. Suddenly, my dad grabbed the wheel and jerked it to the left, guiding us into the correct lane. Oh man, I said. That was close. Yeah, we almost had fried chicken, my dad said. 1 minute later, he was asleep again. Here in Utah with his new wife, things seemed different. More organized, less chaotic. My dad and Karen drove to work together in his Honda Accord, so my new stepmom and I could use her Toyota four-wheel drive truck to get around town. I couldn't believe my luck. That was the kind of gesture I never expected a step-parent to make. The only hitch was I didn't have a driver's license. I got my license almost as fast as I said thank you to Karen. Registration at Utah Tech was a fiasco. The misguidance counselor put me in the wrong program, data processing, not computer science. Data processing had nothing to do with programming a computer. Sure, it involved using computer systems, but using a system is different than creating one, and many of the classes had a business angle that didn't feel relevant. This could have been a rough time for me. I just turned 18 in a strange town. My ex-girlfriend, who I still cared about, was thousands of miles away in England, and the college experience I hoped would change my life pointed me in the wrong direction. My living situation was so-so. I got along with my dad pretty well. He'd come down to my room and have a look at the games I was working on, but he didn't really connect with them. He was still a major drinker. Spending time with him, I noticed that one trait hadn't changed. He'd become ornery and mean if he was sober, and far more sociable and friendly when he had booze in his bloodstream. He still liked to go to bars. Alone. So on many evenings, I'd be home with Karen. To top things off, I didn't have any money. Everything I had saved from Maria's was going towards my tuition. I had to borrow money just to put gas in Karen's car to get to school. As always with my dad, money was scarce, and after a month of school, he told me I needed to get a job. Fortunately, Karen's sister had a brother-in-law who owned a computer store. He hired me to work the floor as a salesman. I was in heaven, surrounded by PCs, Commodores, and Apple IIs. Having spent the better part of the last 6 years reading everything I could about computers, I was the ultimate salesman. Harnessing my undiminished passion and appreciation for the machines and the software, I was an evangelical fanboy, eager to share my knowledge with anyone who wanted it. My fervor resonated with customers. I sold the hell out of our inventory. My secret? Talking my head off. All of my passion was genuine, though. Back then, computer enthusiasts were few and far between, so if I had an audience, a tech ally, I relished the conversation. The combination of sincerity, enthusiasm, and knowledge didn't just help close sales, it also built relationships. Customers became friends as we bonded over the new technology. Phone calls with two of my old pals in California, Rob and Christian, and my programming work also kept my spirits up. I sent out games as they were finished, and the games I published in computer magazines broadened my universe. Each of my game instructions also listed my address, so I got mail. Often the letters were from people who claimed my code didn't work, and I wrote back explaining that it did work and they most likely made a typo in entering the code. This was still a time when publishing a game meant getting a listing of your code in the pages of a magazine. I also got fan letters from people who liked my games. One letter, from a guy in New Jersey who owned a machine shop, asked if I was interested in doing some programming for his business. He paid me in games, pirated games on floppies, but that was as good as money to me. After crawling through the first semester at school, I'd had enough. The courses were a waste of time. I mean that in the literal sense. The computer revolution was moving fast. As I sat there studying data processing and flowcharts, others outside college were mastering assembly language, making games, creating new ways of interacting with players. Time spent in class was time not spent getting ahead. In other words, every minute I spent in class was time I was falling behind. I told my father I was in the wrong program and I was quitting to work full-time at the store. My dad asked me to start paying rent. That marked the beginning of the end of my time in Utah. I didn't want to have a career at a computer store. As fun as that was, I wanted to make games for a game company, and if I was going to have to work to pay rent, I'd rather be near my closest friends or in California, the epicenter of America's computer revolution. I just had to figure out where exactly to go. Rob Lavlock rescued me. Over the phone, I told him I was done with Salt Lake and needed to figure out my next move. I wanted to get back to California, but I wasn't sure how to make it happen. Why don't you come here? You can stay with us. Seriously? Yeah. That would be awesome, but I'm not even sure how I would get there. We'll come get you, my mom and me. We can put your stuff in the back of our truck. I couldn't believe it. It was the perfect out. I wouldn't have to pay rent, I could focus on my games, and I would get to hang out with my best friend. Oh man, that would be so great. Are you sure your mom is cool with it? Totally. It was hard to tell my dad this. He was less than thrilled, but he knew things hadn't exactly gone as planned with school. He also understood that I wanted to be closer to the game industry in California. I packed up my things, thanked my dad and Karen for everything, and got chauffeured to the Lavlock's new home in Yuba City. Looking back, I am grateful for my time with my dad and Karen, and thankful for Karen's influence in his life. I think Karen was the only woman my father really deeply loved. He treated her well, and he regularly told her, "I adore you." I know she loves him to this day. Karen was good to me and my brother, writing us letters, calling, and keeping us connected with our dad. She loved us, and we loved her too. She told me how proud my father was of me and my games. When his drinking turned to drug use, she gave him an ultimatum. And as is the case with many addicts, the drugs made the choice for him. I'm sure it was one of the hardest choices she ever made, but it was the right one for her. My dad returned home to Tucson. Years later, in 2013, I was at a conference in Salt Lake City, and Karen arranged to come and meet me, Brenda, and the kids for lunch. As I walked toward her, she smiled, gasped when she saw me, and then started to cry. She brushed the tears away, but they kept coming. We enjoyed the afternoon, sharing memories, looking at old photos, and reminiscing. When we left, Brenda said something that hadn't occurred to me. I can't imagine how wonderful and difficult that was for her. Difficult? What do you mean? I asked. Imagine loving one man your whole life but not being with him. Then, here you come, the spitting image of that man, and nearly the same age as when she last saw him, too. It hadn't occurred to me, and I'm sure Brenda was right. I'm grateful Karen is still in my life. When I left Salt Lake and bid goodbye to my father and Karen, I was beyond happy to be at the Lavlocks. Rob had just graduated high school, but he was already a budding entrepreneur with a business designing aquariums for rich people. His parents had built their new house in Yuba City, which was about 30 miles from our old stomping grounds of Rockland. It was rural and naturally scenic. The house was roomy and had a great pool in the backyard. Rob and I spent lots of time swimming, lounging, and growing our respective careers. I worked on my games and got better and better at designing them. In June, I cranked out a new creation in 11 days. Rob, who was deep into his aquarium design business, gave me the idea of a seaworthy game I called Twilight Treasures. Players took the role of a diver in scuba gear who moved vertically, hauling treasure from the bottom of the ocean and evading sharks, piranhas, deep-sea mines, and other obstacles. It was a fun game, and the editors of Nibble magazine agreed. Rob and I decided to get to work in earnest, and we had a plan. We started work on a role-playing game called Aberration. Rob's parents would provide funding for the game in the form of housing and feeding me, and in return, we planned to give his parents a percentage of the game's eventual proceeds. There was just one problem. We hadn't cleared this with Rob's parents. Not surprisingly, I didn't get too far with my pitch. Rob's dad didn't know anything about games and wasn't interested in starting now. In late June, after about 3 months of living at Rob's house, although I started working at Taco Bell to make some cash, Mr. Lavlock mentioned it might be time for me to move to greener pastures. I totally got it. I'd been living there rent-free and Mrs. Lavlock was feeding me. I think Rob's father may have also had it with Rob and his live-in business partners. Believe it or not, I was not the first. In another room lived the aquarium business co-founder, Scott. 3 teenage boys under a single roof is a bit much for anyone. After all their kindness, I did not want to wear out my welcome with the Lavlocks. I called my mom to help me develop a plan B. At the time, she was getting ready to leave England and move back to Rockland with Ralph in the middle of August. My stepdad would follow 3 months later, after he packed everything up and sold the house and the car. My moving back into the house in Rockland was not a sure thing, however, because my stepdad considered my decision to live with my biological father an act of betrayal. Mom said she would lobby him, though. Hopeful, I moved in with my mom and Ralph, counting on her to iron things out before he arrived. This seemed like a workable idea. My mom convinced John to let me move back home on one condition. I attend Sierra College, the same college where I had taught myself to code 7 years earlier. I didn't care much about college, but it seemed like the thing to do while I figured out how to land a gig in the game industry. By the time my stepdad returned in November, I was already enrolled in taking classes while working on my games at night. The only thing I had to figure out was transportation. Mobility in Northern California was a major issue for any 18-year-old who wanted a semblance of independence. My 10-speed bike was nice, but didn't cut it. I went to a local Burger King and got a job for $3.50 an hour. I cleared $100 after taxes for a 35-hour work week, and that meant I could afford the $121 monthly payments on a Yugo. The Burger King was owned by former NFL star Jim Otto of the Oakland Raiders, and we were constantly being told it was the top-rated BK franchise in California, and we worked hard to keep it that way. That sense of accomplishment was important to the whole team. Working nights, I had to clean the fryers and broiler, disassembling and washing them in acid at the end of every shift. I was asked to be an assistant manager repeatedly and said no every time. I had no intention of getting deeper into the fast food business. In my 9 months at Burger King, the most interesting thing that happened to me was that a young woman passed me a note at the cash register. "Hi, my friend likes you. She asked me to give you her number." I looked up and saw the friend, a beautiful woman around my age. Apparently I hadn't given her a second look when she placed her order a few minutes earlier, and that made her curious about me. Her name was Kelly Mitchell. She was a year younger than I and still in high school. Before long, we started dating. Things progressed quickly for us. I got the sense that Kelly's family was not too happy about the relationship, though. They were devout Mormons, and I was a devout atheist. In my experience living in Utah, most of the Mormons I met were friendly, warm people. They reminded me of model TV families from the 50s. Positive, happy, clean-cut, and living clean. Kelly's family wasn't mean or nasty to me, and her mother even bought me a bunch of expensive clothing for Christmas. But it was clear to both Kelly and me they hoped we would break up. One night, I got home around midnight and Kelly swung by. Normally we just talk outside, but it was a chilly night. My stepdad had made clear that no extramarital sex was to happen in his house. Ever. It was a message I'd received loud and clear. So when I suggested Kelly come in, there were no ulterior motives in my 19-year-old brain. I knew what a strict and sometimes punishing disciplinarian my stepdad could be. We hung out for about an hour, and then I walked her to the door and said goodbye. I turned around and heard his voice calling me to the living room. "I told you, no girls in the house. You disobeyed me." "It's freezing out. I just invited her in to talk." "I'll bet. That's it. That's the end. You are going to find another place to live tomorrow." "I have nowhere to go," I told him. I was respectful. There was no way talking back to him would make it any better. "That's your problem. You are done here. Tomorrow go find someplace else to live. You are not welcome here anymore." Part of me couldn't believe it, but that was life with John Schooneman. The most dependable thing about him, from my point of view, was that he was always the most hard-assed adult in the room. For years, the frustration I dared not express came out in the Melvin comics I drew. The stepdad choking Melvin to death, Melvin's head stomped in, Melvin's eyes bulging out of his skull. If my kid had been drawing those comics, I'd be more than just a little concerned. I spent the next day scrambling looking for cheap places to live. Surviving on my Burger King salary was not an option. I needed to make more money. My mom appealed to John to give me more time. Otherwise, I'd drop out of school and all that work I'd done would be wasted. I got a temporary reprieve until the end of the spring semester, but the writing was writ large on the wall. I quit Burger King, signed up with a temp agency, and got a series of $9 an hour jobs with tech companies around Sacramento and Rancho Cordova. 2 months later, I had my own apartment in Citrus Heights, a few towns away from Rocklin. When Kelly graduated high school, she moved in with me. At that point, I abandoned school. I didn't need someone at the front of a room to tell me how to program in C at a snail's pace. Too often, the lowest common denominator set the pace in our classroom, and the pace didn't feel quick enough for me. Because I knew assembly and basic, C was easy for me. I worked my way through the C programming language textbook in the first week. I learned at a much faster speed on my own, and I was only too aware that there were people out there who had a decade of experience on me and had already graduated college and learned what they needed to learn. I didn't have any time to spare. I was out on my own and no longer dependent on John Schooneman for anything. It felt great. At the same time, $9 an hour wasn't living large. In fact, between Kelly and I, and given where we lived, it was definitely living small. I knew I could do more. All around me, the game industry was booming, and although I could code in assembly language, C and Pascal, I still wasn't part of it. That needed to change. On September 15th, I gathered up copies of my games on Apple II discs and went to AppleFest 87 at the Moscone Center in downtown San Francisco. The first thing I saw in the pavilion was the Uptime booth. Uptime, a magazine that billed itself as The Disc Monthly, sold floppies loaded with software for various computer platforms. The booth had terminals set up, and as I got closer, I saw a familiar sight on some of the screens. My newly published game, Zippy Zombie. I couldn't believe it. In a way, I was already in the industry. I just hadn't known it. Zippy Zombie was in the new Uptime release, and many people were playing it. On the screens, a creature named Fuzzy jumped from cube to cube on a pyramid, changing the color of the cube with each touch. An evil snake tried to get Fuzzy. When the entire pyramid had changed color, the player got to a new level. I introduced myself to Jay Wilbur, who ran Uptime's Apple II products. We'd been corresponding for about 2 years, and Jay, of course, was the guy who bought my games. So we already had an unspoken mutual admiration society going on, and it was great to meet him in person. I also met Lane Roth, who handled Apple II GS programming for Jay. He was the first hardcore Apple II programmer I'd ever met, and I was one of the first he'd met, so we had a lot to talk about. We spoke a language that few others did. As I left the booth, I made sure to say goodbye to Jay. The publisher of Uptime, Bill Kelly, was also there. "We could use you in Rhode Island, John," Bill said. "How about you come work with us?" I was floored by the offer, but I played it cool and told him I would think about it. As I walked away, I was thinking, this is the best thing ever. I got a job offer from the first booth I visited. I walked over to the soft disk booth. They were Uptime's competitors, and I told them that not only had I published with Uptime, but that my game was featured at their booth. That raised some interest. "We would love for you to send your games to us," the rep said, trading contact information. I was 2 for 2. Eventually, I made my way to the Origin Systems Pavilion. If there was one game company I ever dreamed of working for, it was Origin, the company behind Ultima, one of the most important and beloved role-playing games to date. I was a total fan of the franchise, which involved many classic fantasy elements: dungeons, dragons, character creation and development, exploration, quests, and combat. I'd played every Ultima game since the series launched in 1981, eagerly waiting for each new release and lining up to purchase it on launch day. Richard Garriott, the creator of the Ultima series and the co-founder of Origin Systems, was a rock star of the game industry and was, like game developers Bill Budge and Nasir Gabelli, god level to me. Richard was doing what I wanted to do at a level I had yet to attain. I could do all the same things: design, code, create, art, and write, but he was doing it at a huge scale and with a team of developers, turning out gold with every game. At the time, they were developing Ultima 5, and there were advertisements for it at AppleFest, coming October 31st. Even being in the Origin booth felt magical to me, not unlike going to Disneyland. I had not yet made it into the industry, but I was standing at its front door. I kept my eyes peeled for Richard, or Lord British, the childhood nickname of the English-born Texan was widely known by throughout the industry. I knew exactly what he looked like, and to this day, I'm sure he has a long, thin braid reaching to his mid-back and a silver serpent around his neck. I was confident in my abilities, but I knew I had so far to go to get where Richard already was. He was a huge role model to me. He started out publishing his games in baggies, taking them to his local computer store, and now here he was defining the industry and one of its true celebrities. One of the games Origin was promoting at the pavilion was a new edition of Ultima 1 that they converted to assembly from original, much slower basic programming. I stood in front of the computer displaying this new game and decided this would be an opportune moment for show and tell. I removed the Ultima 1 floppy and popped in one of my discs, which contained my newest work, Lethal Labyrinth. I used a new graphics mode called Double High Res. This was a calculated move on my part. Few people had mastered Double Res, which rendered graphics in 16 colors. To anyone who saw it, I hoped it would speak volumes about my programming ability. However, I needed to make sure someone saw it. Commandeering a computer that was there expressly to promote another game, seemed like a perfectly good idea. Now, I cringe at the audacity of this maneuver. It was a risky thing to do. The Origin director of marketing immediately walked over, which was the whole point. As soon as the game came up, her attitude switched from, "Hey, what's going on over there?" to, "Oh wow, that looks really good. What is this?" I told her it was a game in double high-res and shared my enthusiasm about what double high-res meant for games going forward. I said, "It has more colors than most Apple II games you'll see in this building," which led her to ask for my contact info. I gave her my phone number and address. "By the way," I said, "I'm looking for a job and I would love to work at Origin if there were a position available." She explained that she worked in the marketing division but would put me in touch with the right people in the company's New Hampshire office. I took out my disc and put Ultima 1 back in the machine, rebooted it, and got it running again. Then she gave me her business card. I felt like I'd just gotten the golden ticket, Willy Wonka style. I was walking on air. My head was full of the possibility of landing my dream job. That Monday, I went back to my temp job as technical editor at a company called Jones FutureX that made encrypted communication peripherals for bank PCs to transfer sensitive data between banks. Twice a week, during lunch, I called the Origin marketing director's phone number to find out if there was any opening. This went on for 3 weeks until she said that she could get me in touch with someone who could help. My new Origin contact lived up to her word, connecting me with John Facchini, a programmer in New Hampshire who was responsible for porting Origin games onto new platforms. In other words, making a game that was coded for an Apple II work on a Commodore 64. In October, he told me a position was opening up. "We need a Commodore 64 programmer to convert our role-playing game 2400 AD from the Apple II to the Commodore 64. I'd never worked on a Commodore 64, but I said, "Awesome, I'm ready to do that." "Okay, we'll schedule you for a phone interview. Our final candidate will come to the main office in New Hampshire for the final interview." The next day, I went out and bought a book called Mapping the Commodore 64. I consumed the book. In 2 days, I felt I understood the entire machine. The operating system, its memory capability, the architecture, everything. A few days later, 3 programmers interviewed me on the phone, and I answered every question instantly and confidently. I studied for the test the way lawyers study for the bar. Since I'd just absorbed the Commodore 64 Bible, I was hard selling them on what you can do with a machine I'd never touched. But I was clear about that. At no point did I lie about my own hands-on experience. The next week they called, I beat out 4 other Commodore 64 programmers. It was time to fly to New Hampshire for the final interview. I tried to act casual and wise, like I'd seen everything before, but I had never set foot in a game company office, so just being at Origin was a thrill. I was led into a conference room with 9 other Apple II programmers. Seeing them didn't intimidate me. If one could be over-prepared for a test, I was as over-prepared as they came. I wanted this job. For me, this was less an interview than a party with members of my tribe. I knew everything about the Apple II the same way some kids know everything about their favorite sports team or band. In that room, I was with people who cared about programming, who loved games the way I did. For years, I had existed as a tribe of 1, or 2, counting Rob, studying and worshiping computers, games, and Apple IIs. Now, it felt like I was among my people. Gamers, game developers. My future may have been hanging in the balance, but the interview was a fun, liberating experience. Until this interview, I had no idea where I stood in comparison to other programmers, especially ones who worked inside the game industry. Working in solitude for 8 years, I always felt behind, anxious the technology, and folks like Bill Budge and Nasir Gabelli was outpacing me. I coded constantly and read everything I could get my hands on. This was the first time I would put my technical knowledge to the test, the first time I would see myself not in isolation, but comparatively. I also had no idea what a programmer interview was supposed to be like. Was I going to code in front of them? Would they quiz me on 6502 opcodes? Would they give me buggy code and ask me to fix it? I had no idea. I walked into the room and the 9 programmers stared at me. Never before had I seen a group of programmers collected like this. I'd never seen 9 programmers, period. My anxiety was being displaced by an overwhelming feeling of excitement. I could not wait for this to happen. Let's do it. Ask me anything, I thought. I didn't think there was anything they could ask that I didn't know. Think, of course, is the operative word here. You never know what you don't know until someone asks it. "Have a seat," John Ficini said. He was the project manager. I took a seat. I wanted to start talking, but thought I should wait for the questions. Steve Moose went first. "So, you're here to do porting between the Apple II and the Commodore 64. Can you tell us about the similarities between the two computers?" Where to even start? I didn't want to risk leaving anything out, so I started at the beginning. They are 8-bit computers that have 64K of RAM and a ROM bank that controls all the functions of the computer. There are special memory locations that control hardware specific to both computers. The Commodore has a 6510 CPU and the Apple II has a 6502 CPU, which means they both have the same instruction set, but the Commodore has an 8-bit bidirectional I/O port on the back. No one stopped me, and so I kept going. The great news is that you can switch out the ROM and I/O on the Commodore, so you have full 64K of memory. The Apple II has a bank-switched memory that can also get you close to that, but you cannot switch out the $C000 range, since that controls hardware. The C64 has a 16 color mode that can display even more colors than the Apple II, so I plan on using that. Really, most of the port would be handling input and graphics and sound output to maximize the Commodore hardware. Nodding, the programmers pivoted. "We'd like to talk to you about your knowledge of the 6502 assembly." This was the moment I was waiting for. I was so eager, and it showed. Ask me anything. Instructions, ROM locations, anything at all about the Apple II. I can answer anything. Some of the older programmers smiled and looked at one another. "Sure, kid." And so they did. They asked me anything and everything. It was the most fun I'd had in weeks, talking with 9 experts about a language I loved. I was so grateful for the experience and enjoying the conversation so much that I think I lost sight of it being an interview. I found I could talk their talk and walk their walk. It was a watershed moment. I felt energized and liberated. Concerns I had about being behind the curve left me and were replaced by a drive to get ahead. One perfectly timed coincidence helped set the mood for the interview. My new game, Major Mayhem, had been accepted by Nibble magazine. When they asked me what I'd been doing, it was a timely thing to mention, and it served as a lead-in to all the other games I'd created. Even though I was younger than everyone else in the room, just going through my games and the magazines that published them was a tangible way to communicate that I knew my stuff and let them know I could handle the work. They offered me the job, and I accepted. I was now part of the game industry, and that made my existence in the real world easier. Finding a good job was more important than ever because Kelly was pregnant. We decided to get married at my parents' insistence and, much to her parents' dismay, and then drove across the country to my new job. I was barely 20 and bound for glory, or so I hoped anyway. My starting salary? $22,000. It was certainly a livable salary at the time, particularly since I would have done all of it for free. I was exactly where I wanted to be. Chapter 7. An Origin Story. In early November 1987, we drove across America in tandem. Kelly in her Ford EXP, and me in my Yugo. But it was not the road trip we'd envisioned. In Nevada, the heater in Kelly's car died, and we wound up switching back and forth between cars so we could both be warm some of the time. In Albany, the Ford's transmission died. We left the car there to get repaired and drove together in a race against the clock. I was due in Manchester, New Hampshire to start work the next day, and the truck delivering our stuff was arriving too. Nothing was easy back then. We didn't have a lot of support, fiscal or moral. 1 month earlier, when we decided to get married, Kelly's parents were not at all pleased. Mormons, generally speaking, don't believe in unwed couples cohabiting or having sex before marriage, and they were understandably upset about their daughter. On the other hand, we didn't think we were doing anything wrong. My parents liked Kelly, but they were quietly wary about 2 young, inexperienced, and underfunded kids building a life together. My mom never said as much, but Kelly was following in her footsteps by marrying a Romero straight out of high school. And Kelly, like my mom, got pregnant early on. I'm not sure if these similarities made my mom want to urge caution, or whether the similarities prevented her from saying anything because it might have sounded hypocritical. It wouldn't have mattered much. Once Kelly was pregnant, we wanted to get married. We went to City Hall and took our vows, and that was that. I started at Origin in mid-November, the same week Nibble magazine splashed my game on the cover of its new issue. Major Mayhem, read the featured headline, complete type-in arcade action space adventure. The accompanying artwork showed our hero inside his rocket blasting out from the screen of an Apple II over the legs of a nasty tarantula. Puffy clouds of smoke, presumably from the rocket lifting off, poured out of the monitor and swirled around the spider and the rocket. I had mentioned the game in my interview with Origin. Now it was out, and I was here. It was perfect timing, helping me cement a good reputation. My manager, John Ficini, was the lead coder on Ultima 5 for the PC, and he had programmed for PCs and the Apple II, so I was impressed with him. I had no experience coding PCs, but they were becoming a larger segment of the home computer market. Despite my love of Apple IIs, I recognized that Ficini was a programming badass, and I could learn from him. Ficini was happy to share. He was a great boss who explained the industry to me in terms of salaries and expectations, stuff that I had no way of knowing. For instance, he told me that $30,000 was the top pay for someone who did straight coding. He told me he made $45,000 because he was the lead coder and managing a couple projects. The more responsibility you take on, the more money you'll be paid. He was only 6 years older than me, and we really clicked. We ate lunch together, discussed games, projects, and programming. One night in December, I was working late at the office, and Robert Garriott, brother of Richard Garriott and co-founder of Origin, asked me to help him for a minute. It just so happened that Robert was having a meeting with Sur Tech Software, publishers of Wizardry. The first Wizardry game came out the same year as Ultima and was just as influential in the role-playing game, or RPG, universe. In my personal pantheon, it ranked as one of the most important computer games in history, and now, somehow at 9 p.m., I was randomly meeting the company's co-founder, Robert Sirotek. With Robert was a game writer named Brenda Garno. She was just a year older than me, and she'd started at Surtech as a teenager, running the Wizardry phone hotline. Like me, she was working her way up. It was nice to meet someone else who'd started in the industry as a teenager and who was into RPGs too. When the meeting was over, she went back to northern New York where Surtech was based, but she'd made an impression. I went back to my work for John, being a department of one, responsible for porting, recoding a game built for one computer system to work on another. I started to examine 2400 AD's assembly code for the Apple II, and my job was to convert it to run on the Commodore 64's hardware. It didn't take long for me to realize there must be a way to move the files from one machine to the other. In 1988, there were no standard interfaces between different computers, no compatible floppy disks, and no cross-platform APIs, or application programming interfaces, the intermediary programs that now allow different systems to share information seamlessly. If I couldn't move files between the two machines, I had to retype the assembly language for the gameplay code and then write new code for the input-output, or I/O, to make it work on the Commodore 64. Retyping all that assembly wasn't an exciting option, because the Commodore 64's keyboard was horrible compared to the Apple II GS's keyboard. I asked Ficini if there was a way to connect machines to move a lot of the code. "We don't have anything like that here," he said. "Why don't you call the tech team in Austin and ask them?" I contacted the person who wrote software development tools in Austin, Alan Gardner, and got the same response. "We don't have anything like that." "Well, what do you normally do for porting between systems?" "We just recreate everything from scratch on the new computer." That makes no sense, I thought. I can figure this out. I went to Radio Shack and bought what I thought the job would require: a soldering iron, solder, some 4-wire telephone cable, and a 9-pin D connector, which plugged into the Commodore 64's joystick port. For the Apple II, I got a 16-pin IC chip with 2 rows of 8 pins that fit inside the computer. Back at the office, I soldered 4 wires to the IC chip. Then, I soldered the remaining 4 wires on the other end of the cable into the D-pin connector. Once finished, I plugged it into the joystick port and plugged the 16-pin IC chip into the Apple II GS motherboard. Now that the machines were connected, the Apple II I/O port connected to the Commodore joystick port. The Apple could send data to the Commodore. I had to write the code so the Commodore 64 would accept the data, but it was a net time win for me. The Apple II was much faster than the Commodore, so I had to figure out what speed to send the data without causing the Commodore to lose any of the transfer. As I was doing that, I discovered something about the Commodore 64. Coding on it was physically painful. Commodore were a calculator company, and the 64 had calculator keys that were not ideal for sustained typing. The Apple II GS keyboard, in comparison, was a thing of ergonomic beauty, even in 1988. It was low and sleek with shallow keys that didn't feel like I was pressing down on large buttons. I decided the most efficient course of action was to program the Commodore version of the game on the Apple II GS, and then just use my new interface to send the program over to the Commodore. Years later, I found out Will Wright, creator of The Sims, did the same thing for one of his early games. I finished this project in about 4 days. I showed it to Ficini and explained how it was programmed on the Apple II GS and then transferred to the Commodore. The next week, I got an 18% raise. My salary went from $22K to $26K. I had been there less than 2 months, and I was thrilled. Kelly, thankfully, had a trouble-free pregnancy, but our timing for the actual birth was a little off, thanks in no small part to an Arctic-level snowstorm that gripped the northeast U.S. on February 13th. As 2 kids from Northern California, we'd never seen anything like it. Concord, New Hampshire, just 20 minutes north of Londonderry, where we had settled, reported 13 inches of snow on the ground. Snow and ice were everywhere when Kelly's contractions started getting faster. I rushed out to the car and found the doors frozen shut and the keyhole iced over. I heated the key to slot it in and turn the lock, but the door itself was still frozen. Finally, I put one foot up against the car and wrenched the door open. I got Kelly inside and poured windshield wiper fluid all over the window to melt the ice. We made it to the hospital, and 24 hours later, on Valentine's Day 1988, Michael Alfonso Romero made his entrance into the world. I was a 20-year-old father with a new job, but I made it a point to work 9 to 5 and come home and give Kelly some downtime. Unfortunately, Kelly didn't have a lot of other support. She'd barely been in town 3 months. She wasn't working, hadn't made any real friends, and our families were thousands of miles away. In April, the project I was hired for at Origin was canceled. The game I was porting hadn't sold well in its Apple II incarnation, and the company figured it wouldn't sell well on other computers either, which seemed logical. I switched projects to a game called Space Rogue, a 3D flight simulation game with RPG elements being developed by Paul Neurath. While I was working on it, John Ficini approached me. He was unhappy about the internal politics at Origin and asked me if I wanted to form a startup. Whatever politics there were, they were over my head. I loved everything about Origin. He pitched me on forming a game company that would initially code ports and eventually build original games. He wanted me as his co-founder. My response was immediate. Yeah, that would be awesome. As much as I loved Origin, I was fresh off the 2400 AD cancellation. What if they had canceled Space Rogue too? I couldn't afford to be out of a job now, especially with a new baby boy. Running my own company with another person I trusted would be a great learning experience. As a safeguard, I told John I couldn't leave unless my salary was guaranteed and equal to what I was making at Origin. I didn't know when another opportunity like this might come along. Finding jobs in the 1980s, particularly in a fledgling industry, wasn't as simple as hopping on the internet. Most jobs were filled via word of mouth, advertisements in local papers, or listings in computer magazines. Resumes and cover letters were sent by mail, provided you knew the company and its address. So I took the chance I had, reasoning that it would be in our best long-term interest. I was willing to work hard to make sure we succeeded. As it turned out, that next chance happened just a week later. Paul asked if I was interested in co-founding his new startup after I shipped Space Rogue. Paul's studio, Blue Sky Productions, went on to create many seminal titles, most notably Ultima Underworld. Sometimes I do wonder what might have happened if I had been paired with their amazing programmer Doug Church. Why didn't I join Paul? 2 reasons. First, I gave John my word, and he had already started talking with potential clients for 2 ports. Second, I hadn't worked long with Paul and didn't know him as well as John. There was also a third reason, I suppose. Paul used the Orca M assembler, and I used Merlin 16, a much faster 6502 assembler. It took hours to assemble Space Rogue because it used Orca M, and I never understood why he wouldn't switch to the faster assembler. Paul used a lot of macros in his assembly language, and macros take time for an assembler to interpret. Although its name was macro backward, Orca M was far slower at processing macros than Merlin. It's an odd reason not to join a startup, I suppose, but these little details matter to programmers. I left Origin without meeting my idol Richard Garriott, who worked out of the company's Austin office just 7 months after landing my dream job there. The new company, Inside Out Software, began with promise. We got a business loan to buy John a 20 MHz 386DX, a state-of-the-art PC, for $5,000, and John signed a porting contract to translate the Apple II version of New World Computing's Might and Magic 2 to the PC and Commodore 64. I started working in John's apartment on his Apple II GS, and after a couple months, we rented space down the street from Origin's offices. Things were going great, and not just for the business either. My wife was again pregnant, and we looked forward to expanding our little family. She missed her family back in California, though, and the pregnancy only increased that longing. She supported this New Hampshire journey of ours and our new company, and we'd hoped for the best. Before long, Inside Out Software had a relationship with Infocom to finish developing Brian Moriarty's TimeSync and move the Mac game to the PC, and to create an original game based on the 1979 movie Alien. We also got a conversion contract to move a great Mac game called Dark Castle to the Apple II GS. With more conversion work coming in, we decided to hire more staff, a couple of coders to finish my Might and Magic 2 port, and I started on a new port called Tower Toppler, Commodore 64 to Apple II. For TimeSync and Alien, we hired 2 artists. As luck would have it, one of my friends at Uptime, Apple programmer Lane Roth, told me he was looking for a new gig. Both Lane and my old editor at Uptime, Jay Wilbur, said that Uptime was hitting the skids. Lane immediately accepted our job offer and moved to Londonderry. Lane and I had a real bond. We both loved programming, games, and Apple IIs. Lane, though, was much more of a purist than I was. He hated PCs with a vengeance, and his contempt rubbed John the wrong way. John was agnostic on the PC versus Apple question. It didn't help that John was coping with business growth issues at the time and didn't want Lane's negativity in the office. In less than a month, the relationship between my partner and my pal became toxic. Eventually, Lane had had enough and quit, which was a fatal blow for the Dark Castle port. We needed an Apple II GS programmer, and Lane was a total pro. Adding fuel to the fire, John delayed paying Lane's final check, and Lane filed a complaint with the Better Business Bureau, something no startup company wants. Then, Lane placed a call to 360 Pacific, the company that hired us to port Dark Castle. "I'm the guy who was handling your game and I just quit," Lane told them. "How about you guys transfer the contract to me?" This sent John over the edge. "You brought this fucking guy into the company and he screwed us," he yelled at me. "Don't get mad at me because you drove him away and we don't have the person to do the contract. He just stole our client." John, if you think about it, Lane actually just did us a favor. We don't have anyone to do that work. If he didn't take it, we would have blown our deadline for sure. Things were tense in the office after that, and in February, they got grimmer when the Tower Toppler client canceled their porting contract. I had been in the industry for 15 months, and this was now the second canceled project I'd worked on. Was this normal for the industry? I wondered. The answer was no. I realized that the computer industry was undergoing a shift. An entire generation of computers that limited a unit of data to 8 bits was about to go the way of the dinosaurs. Computers like the Apple II had lasted longer than they should have, most likely because they were the first generation of a new technology. The PC, introduced in 1981 by IBM, had a 16-bit processor. The additional power and lower cost of these machines translated into growing sales. The market for the computer Lane and I loved was shrinking and destined to become obsolete. I knew I needed to bite the bullet and become fluent in PC programming as quickly as possible. That old feeling and fear of falling behind returned. John was stressed by financial pressures and his own personal issues. I decided to seize the initiative. "John, my project is canceled," I said. "That was money we needed to pay me and run the business. I know we're partners, but I think this is going to be easier for both of us if I sign over all my shares of the company to you and I'll just move on." That marked the end of my first real startup. I had tried to make my own luck and failed within 9 months, largely due to factors beyond my control. The computer industry's evolution, which I probably should have seen coming, and the personality clash between John and Lane. Both these things were valuable learning experiences, as all failures are. In the future, I told myself, I need to think about game development from a broader perspective, one that factored in technology trends like increased processing power and the new computers that really drove the industry. I also needed to safeguard any companies I founded by making sure our revenue stream was diverse and not able to be so easily wiped out. This desire to grow the business, to have multiple streams of income, influenced me heavily during the later id Software years. I also needed to remember that not everyone had grown up with an Alfonso Romero or John Schooneman in their life. I survived by trying to avoid creating friction with others and steering clear of disagreements that didn't involve me. That was one of my survival strategies. I needed to either pick better partners or be a bit more proactive in helping iron out workplace differences. Tower Toppler's toppling created a cascade of issues at home, too. Kelly was 8 months pregnant now, and more than anything, we needed stability. Life in Londonderry was lonely for her without her mother and father, and she wanted them around when she gave birth. So she moved back to her parents' house in Folsom, California to have the baby, while I figured out our next steps. Michael, of course, went with her. Just 15 months earlier, I'd been on top of the world, living out my dreams and planning for our future. Everything seemed possible. Fortunately, I didn't bottom out into despair. I just needed to make something happen. My other survival strategy, solving problems to eliminate friction, needed to kick in. Chapter 8. PC Conversion. I was out of a job, away from my family, and also out of an apartment, so I moved into Lane's place. We were good friends, and I didn't have any hard feelings over him leaving Inside Out Software. After all, we didn't know he and John would clash. I worked on the graphics for Dark Castle, taking the black and white art and converting it to 16-color Super Res to help him finish the porting job. We named our impromptu company Ideas from the Deep. Our lives revolved around game development and metal, and so, from morning to night, we made games while listening to Skid Row, Dokken, and Motley Crue. In the meantime, I was searching for my next gig. As it turned out, Jay Wilbur had left Uptime and told me he was interviewing for a gig at a software subscription company in Shreveport, Louisiana called SoftDisk that shipped monthly discs full of software to subscribers. I had seen them at Applefest in 1987. It sounded interesting, and I needed a job. At the time, I was naive enough to think anyone could just call up a company and ask to speak to its top brass about a job. So that's exactly what I did. Called SoftDisk and asked to speak to the president of the company. Unbelievably, I got through. "This is Al Vacovius." "Hi, my name is John Romero." "Oh yeah, I've heard about you." Wow, I thought. That's good news. Turns out Al had hired Uptime's editor-in-chief, Mike Amarello. He had sung the praises of Jay and his old crew. Jay mentioned to me Al because I was his primary game provider at Uptime, sending him stuff every month. I plowed ahead. "I'm calling because I'm interested in working at SoftDisk. I really want to learn the PC and write games for it. Our PC disk is our biggest moneymaker. If you need someone to program, especially games, I think I'd be a good fit. I used to work for Origin, and I sold a lot of games to Uptime and Insider and other magazines." "Oh, Origin? Wow. Great. That's impressive. How about I send you a plane ticket for this weekend? You can see the company, check out Shreveport, and we can meet." "That would be awesome. By the way, I don't know if you need anyone else, but I'm living with a great programmer. His name's Lane Roth, and he used to work at Uptime too." "Okay, I'll send 2 tickets. Lane called Jay to tell him that we were heading down to Shreveport. The same weekend, Jay was heading there for his interview. While some deep grooves of talent and companies existed in the tech hubs around Boston and San Francisco, In the early days of the game industry, there were smaller tech companies scattered everywhere, so finding one in Louisiana didn't seem odd to me. I was excited to meet the Softdisk team and to sell them on what we could do. Lane and I flew down to Shreveport and met with Al, or Big Al, as the 6-foot-plus boss was often affectionately called. A mathematician who was the former head of the computing department at LSU's medical school in Shreveport, Big Al was an impressive character with an open, warm demeanor. He still taught at the school as an adjunct while he ran Softdisk. Big Al and his co-founders hit on a compelling model to distribute computer disks with pre-installed software tailored to specific computer systems via subscription. Previously, computer magazines like Nibble contained code for random programs in each issue. Subscribers got an issue and typed in the code for each program they were interested in. Now, they popped in a Softdisk floppy, started browsing, and used the content immediately. Like those early programming mags, there was little rhyme or reason to the content in any given Softdisk release. A mortgage calculator, a biorhythm calculator, clip art, a puzzle, a daily planner. Games were a rarity, as they had been for the early magazines. If I had any say in the matter, I would make sure Softdisk had games in as many issues as possible. The company's biggest title was Big Blue Disc, a pointed reference to IBM's nickname Big Blue that telegraphed the content. All the programs were for PCs. With 50,000 subscribers, each putting down $87 a year, Softdisk's model was good from my perspective. I can't imagine it cost more than $2 to manufacture and mail each disc. Most of the software on the disc was submissions from external authors, the title Softdisk used to refer to software developers. The internal authors took the external submissions, made them professional, fixed bugs, and got them fit for public release. Softdisk didn't want to talk to me about that, though. They brought me down to Louisiana to lead a newly created Special Projects division with the sole purpose of making games, and not just small games for their monthly discs either. The Special Projects division was about big games like the ones that Origin made. Al understood the appeal of gaming. He made clear he was interested in adding that to Softdisk's arsenal of releases during our talk. I explained that I needed to get up to speed on PCs to develop games, and he was okay with that. He took us on a tour of Shreveport, too. I think he worried that we wouldn't like it, but after 2 winters in New Hampshire, I loved the town's steamy climate and Cross Lake on the west side of town. Al also threw a big party at his house during our visit, and we got to meet a lot of the staff. Everyone was friendly and welcoming. Afterward, Jay and Lane remarked how cool everyone seemed. Months later, we learned it was all an act. The programmers were terrified that these 3 East Coast gunslingers were going to come in and take everyone's job. But the fact was, nobody's job was at risk at the time. Al offered each of us $27,000. We accepted. Nobody got fired. Jay, Lane, and I flew back east. We had 2 weeks before we were due in Shreveport, so we decided to take advantage of that time. Lane and I got to work on Zaporoids, an asteroids-like game. I made the Apple II version while Lane got busy with the Apple II GS. We finished within the week and promptly sold them to Softdisk under our company name, Ideas from the Deep. With a job secured, I was excited to get my family under one roof, and it was not a minute too soon. Kelly was going into labor. I hopped a flight to California and welcomed my second son, Stephen Patrick. Like Michael, he was a beautiful baby, and I felt an incredible mix of pride and pressure to make sure that my family was secure and cared for. While there, I shared the exciting news about Softdisk and tried to sell Katie on moving to Shreveport. She agreed to give it a try. It was a different world then, without text or video calls or email. Home computers were a relative rarity still, and long-distance calls were expensive and reserved for important things like, "I'm going into labor." Prior to my visit home, we exchanged only letters. There was so much to tell her, and it was a lot for Kelly to take in. I spent some wonderful time with Kelly, Stephen, and Michael before heading back to New Hampshire to pack up my stuff at Lane's while Kelly recuperated from the delivery. There wasn't much to pack in New Hampshire. A bed, a stereo, and a TV, as well as my computer, its manuals, and some clothing. I also had amassed a few boxes of personal papers that contained everything from source code to drawings to acceptance or rejection letters for every game I had created to date. Movers came to collect our stuff, and Lane, Jay, and I hit the road. I faced an enormous learning curve when I arrived in Shreveport. I was determined to learn every byte of the PC, just like I did with the Apple II, in a matter of months. I've been programming for about 10 years at this point, which gave me confidence, but the architecture of the PC was completely different than the Apple II. The biggest challenges were grasping the ins and outs of the 8086 16-bit processor. The PC had more sophisticated hardware than the Apple II and could address 640K of RAM, which meant I could write bigger games. While it used assembly language, it was a different assembly language written specifically to the computer's processor. Conceptually, there were similarities, but the instruction sets, or the words used to tell the CPU what to do, were completely different. It was like learning a new coding language, though easier for me since I already knew several. I dug in to face the challenge of learning a brand new computer with its new hardware and instruction set, and I was excited to do it. A pattern became apparent to me then, a pattern that continues to this day. Technology reinvents itself. As critical as it was to get ahead, the best one could ever do was to get there first and excel at the new technology. That first month in Shreveport, Jay took over as editor of SoftDisk Apple II and SoftDisk GS, while Lane and I got to work as the sole members of the new Special Projects division. Lane got to work on a new small game for SoftDisk GS, while I started a deep dive into PC programming that rivaled my days of manic focus converting my main programming language from BASIC into assembly as a 15-year-old. The PC market was growing, and I needed to be part of it to succeed. When it came to programming, I was competitive. The drive to be an exceptional programmer was still all-consuming for me, but at this stage, my thirst was, in part, fueled by a combination of my unflagging passion for games and the pressure I felt to develop a career so I could support my growing family. I spent every minute poring over magazines, books, and manuals to embed PC programming knowledge in my brain. You can only learn so much from books, though. As I picked up the fundamentals, I realized learning is always better when it's project-based. My hands wanted to code, not turn pages. So I took an Apple II game the company had published already and ported it to the PC using Pascal, which I had learned at Sierra College. Pascal was not the optimal language for games, but it worked and was quick and easy. In porting the game, I didn't want to be creative and consider its design. I wanted to devote all of my brain to learning the tech as fast as I could. Sometimes, the different sides of my brain work independently like that. When I showed it to Bob Knapp, the Big Blue Disc editor, he said, "Oh my god, a game! Our users love games." So I ported games during my learning process and gave them to Big Blue Disc. I kept at it. The next month, I dug up Twilight Treasures, the game I'd sold to Nibble magazine in 1986, and used assembly language in Pascal to convert it to PC. I wrote all the game logic in Pascal and the graphics drawing code in 8086 assembly language to speed up the game's graphics drawing. That went into the next Big Blue Disc release. In addition to games, I was also writing tools for Big Blue Disc, again to increase my knowledge. The more I programmed, the faster I learned. My goal was to write a game fully in assembly. I'd be as close to the machine as possible then, and be ready to code a big game for the Special Projects division. Of course, the Big Blue Disc editor loved all the content. Surprisingly, another editor suggested I curtail my submissions a bit, saying, "I know you're eager, but they're going to continue to expect this." I blasted heavy metal and spent some of my time writing stuff other than games, like game reviews and articles that were also included on each disc. One of the key players on the Big Blue Disc production team was a 45-year-old programmer named George Larite, who had mastered 8086 assembly language. After a month there, I learned assembly too, but obviously I still had gaps in my knowledge of PC hardware. One day, I hit a wall on a tool program. It lacked a critical piece of technical information about the PC, and I couldn't figure out how to solve the issue. Naturally, I asked George. "I don't know." "Come on, George, this seems like something you would know." "Yeah, no, sorry." "Where can I find the information? I'm trying to get this program done to get published on your disk. It's going to be great." "I don't know what to tell you." I thought he was lying. I couldn't understand why he clammed up at first. Then I realized I was less than half his age, and I was infringing on his territory. Maybe he felt threatened, which is ironic because I had zero interest in coding for Big Blue Disc. All my interest in programming was so I could make games. Maybe he was just pulling my leg. 2 days later, George came by my desk and said, "I found this program that does what I think you need." "Great," I said. "Where's the source code for it?" "I don't know." "I need to know exactly what it's doing." "I just found it." Of course, I found out later he'd written the program. He knew exactly what I needed to know, but he wasn't going to tell me. I finally dug up the solution myself, locating the technical information in a PC magazine, and finished the program. Then I stomped over to Bob Knapp and told him what had happened. "This is ridiculous," I said. "I'm doing this stuff for you." Instead of advocating for me, Knapp came back and said, "New rule, don't ask George any questions." "What?" "You are not allowed to ask George any questions." I was dumbfounded, but I wasn't deterred. In fact, I was ready. The previous month, while quarreling with George, I had finished Pyramids of Egypt for Big Blue Disc. It was written fully in assembly language, and I felt that I had an expert-level understanding of the PC and its architecture. Lane and I got together to kick off the Special Projects Division's first big game, Eskimo Joe, a Bomberman-type game, but on ice. After 2 weeks of work, however, we got a message. The Special Projects Division was killed. I was needed full-time on Big Blue Disc to fill the lull in content that I had inadvertently created. Lane, meanwhile, went back to the Soft Disk GS Division. We were crushed. At the end of my first year, I was finished learning the PC, and I was finished trying to help a department that had a grumpy lead programmer who wouldn't allow me to ask him questions to help the product he was supporting. It was precisely the opposite of the excitement I felt when I considered the opportunities before us. I was also not making the kind of games I wanted to make. Bigger games than my old Apple II games, games that took a year to make and would be displayed on store shelves. Although I'd mastered the PC, I wasn't doing what I wanted to do, or what Al originally hired me to do, make big games. "Al," I said, "thanks for having me here. It's been amazing. I've been here for a year, learned the PC, and cranked tons of stuff out, but I need to leave. I want to make games." Wait, John. Hold on," Al stammered. "We can solve this. I don't think you have to go anywhere." "I'd love to stay. I really appreciate you hiring me, but if I'm not making games here, I'm going to LucasArts." I hadn't contacted anyone at George Lucas's gaming division, but it was the first choice on my list of plan Bs. "Let me see what I can do. I'll get back to you within the week." A few days later, Al came back to talk. "How about we start a subscription disc where you're making a game every month?" "One game a month is impossible, unless you want really shitty games," I said. "All the other titles are monthly. I guess we could try every other month." 2 months would be amazing, and if I could actually have a team, an artist, and another programmer, that would be perfect. It was a big ask to go from 1 to 4, including a managing editor, Softdisk's title for a producer, but I knew that I could make much better games if I had help. It took Al a few months to make it happen, but he did it. He walked by and with a big smile on his face said, "Get ready to hire your team for PC Arcade." He believed in me and had the vision to see how important games were. I was completely stoked. I asked Lane if he'd be interested in being the editor/manager, and he thought that'd be cool. He still wasn't interested in learning the PC. Then I asked Jay if he had any suggestions for a game programmer, and he told me about a kick-ass WizKid who provided Apple II games and had even begun porting them to PC. There was only one problem. Softdisk had already tried to recruit him twice, and he turned down those offers. The elusive programmer was named John Carmack. I'd played Carmack's game Tennis, which I liked, and I also knew he'd made an RPG called Dark Designs. The perspective view of the gameplay in Tennis was of particular interest to me, as it offered a tilted side view, showing that he had physics working on an Apple II, which was a rare thing in games at that time. Further, it featured fluid animation. I knew that this was the work of a great programmer. "Jay, can you call him again?" "He's not interested," he told me. "Like I said, we've tried." If he was a game programmer like me, and everything pointed in that direction, I could see why he might not be interested. After all, I had just threatened to leave. "I think he'd be interested in working with another game programmer," I said, remembering about how I felt working with the Origin coders for the first time. "We'll try it, but he said he wasn't interested and was happy to keep doing what he was doing." Tell him that he'll be coming here to make games and to join another experienced game programmer. I think that will make a difference. I hoped so, anyway. It turns out that I was right. At the time, meeting another game programmer was like finding a needle in a haystack. I couldn't imagine why he wouldn't want to do it, because I had been in his shoes. And, as luck would have it, Carmack was looking for something more stable than the sporadic pay his freelance game developer lifestyle gave him. We invited him down to Shreveport for an interview. Carmack liked to drive and had spent money fixing up his clunky MGB, so a road trip from his home in Kansas City to Shreveport didn't seem like a bad idea. He told me later that he fully expected to turn Softis down again, that this, quote, other experienced game programmer, end quote, would turn out to be a myth, but it couldn't hurt to listen. Big Al took us all out to dinner at the Italian Garden, Jay, Lane, Carmack, and me. When Carmack and I met, it was an absolute meeting of like minds. He was a fresh-faced 19-year-old who looked like he had yet to shave. I was all of 22. I eventually discovered that we came from different sides of the tracks. His family was far more affluent than mine, but as we talked that evening, it was almost as if we had inhabited parallel lives when it came to games and programming, having both spent thousands of hours mastering our three obsessions: games, computers, programming. When I say thousands of hours, I mean that literally. Over the course of my life, I have bonded with programmers, including some of the most legendary figures in games and computer design, from Steve Wozniak to Bill Budge to Nasir Gabelli and others. However, on that first meeting, Carmack and I instantly connected on multiple levels because we shared a deep knowledge base and passion that creates instant bonds. We understood each other and the significance of our respective work, and we admired each other's abilities. We spoke a language that, while rooted in normal everyday English, was unique. We saw a world of possibility in games, and we knew we had the knowledge and drive to master it. We saw that in each other. It's hard to describe how it felt. Imagine caring deeply about something, so deeply that you feel compelled to master it. Imagine no one else around you gets it. Not your family, not your partner, not your friends. Not really. Imagine meeting someone else just like you for the first time. That's what it felt like when we met each other. Jay and Al spent the whole night listening to a non-stop stream of programmer speak that was all game programming techniques at a totally granular level. Which assembler did you use on the Apple II? Did you use the TASM assembler for the 8086 on the PC? Do you know C? Have you written double high-res code on the Apple II? How much do you know about DOS 3.3 or ProDOS? Have you memorized the memory map of the Apple II? Have you done any BIOS programming on the PC? Have you written any TSRs? And on and on. Carmack, Lane, and I were kings of the Apple II, but from today's perspective, we were kings of the computer's Stone Age. Our machines were unbelievably primitive compared to the modern computer. They had minimal memory and limited processing power, so everything, as a rule, ran slow. A good game requires speed, and that meant we had to optimize the hell out of our games. Today you can run code on a modern computer that is capable of running at a speed of 5 billion cycles per second. You can make a lightning-fast game without knowing a line of assembly code. In 1988, programmers were working with 32-bit microprocessors that ran 33 million cycles per second, not multiple billions, and we still had to write code that put each and every pixel on the screen as fast as possible. To get that speed required assembly language. That block of code did all the graphics work, and when we constructed it, we needed to use maximum efficiency and logic, every coding trick, to build the fastest, most reactive games. The CPU executed the code, the graphics card on your machine displayed it, and let the gameplay start. Today, the majority of graphics processing is handled by a graphics card, not by the game programmers trying to directly put dots on the screen. We were members of an unofficial secret society that studied the same sacred texts, knew the best hacks, and enjoyed the same rituals. Our chatter started with a discussion of Apple IIs and moved on to processors and PCs, which Lane couldn't contribute to because he stopped learning with the Apple II GS. We riffed on video games that had impressed and inspired us, detoured to Dungeons and Dragons, and shared our mutual love of tricks to speed up our code. Eventually, other parallels between us surfaced. Like me, Carmack was a huge comics fan as a kid. He went to college for a year and hated it. He had parents who derided his passion for games. I had more experience on PCs than Carmack, but he told me something that impressed the hell out of me during our first chat. He realized that if he took an Apple II game that he'd sold to Softdisk and converted it to PC, he'd more than double his money since Big Blue Disc paid more for PC games than Softdisk did for Apple II games. 1 month he was low on cash, having moved out on his own, so he rented a PC for a week, learned how to program it, converted his game, and then returned the rental. "Dude, that is genius," I said. That innovation totally appealed to my roots as a freelance game developer, and the fact that he had learned the PC in 1 week was seriously impressive. I spun my idea for Gamer's Edge, which was the name that had replaced PC Arcade. I wanted to crank out top-shelf computer games that were better than anything on the market. I'd spent a year broadening my PC knowledge base, and now, with another top coder, I could finally start to fulfill my life's mission, making the most fun and engaging, best-looking games possible. Games I wanted to play. Although Jay had warned us that Carmack was a lone wolf, I didn't get that feeling at all. It felt like two of us, Carmack and me, were in total alignment. He was an animated, extremely knowledgeable programmer who would be an asset on any team. He later told people that my thorough understanding of the PC and graphics design and art skills were what swayed him to join us. I knew things that he didn't. Given his all-consuming mania for game programming, that was the deciding factor. He took the job and I was beyond excited. I was even more excited when I saw Carmack in action. He could and would sit for hours and hours studying and coding. Like me, he didn't smoke, drink, or do drugs. Unlike me, he didn't have a family or even a girlfriend. He lived alone, which meant he could spend every minute of every day poring over the PC. And that's what he did. The only time he wasn't programming was when he slept or walked to our office refrigerator to get another Coke. He was in boot camp, working 24/7, trying to learn as much as possible about PCs. It was incredible to watch someone else besides me run a programming ultra-marathon. The three of us set up our office for serious work. In addition to Intel 386 PCs provided by Big Al, we invested in a fridge, a microwave, and a Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES. We liked metal, so we cranked our favorite tunes. Our eyes were locked on code, on books, on magazines, downloading it all into our heads. Carmack and I shared information with each other, teaching techniques picked up along our solo paths. We didn't do this because we had to. We did this because we wanted to. If you've ever stayed up far too late because you were playing a game, binging a series, or reading a book, code had the exact same effect on us. Learning more was its own reward. If I was fast, together we were super fast. Carmack's ability to understand and retain knowledge of systems, programming patterns, algorithms, and computer languages equaled mine. I had never worked with anyone like me before, and he had never worked with anyone like him. It was amazing. Educators have called me a child prodigy with code, and I suppose I was. It also helped that I had hyperthymesia. Carmack was unquestionably gifted too, but in a different, deeply analytical way, synthesizing information and using it to innovate technically. His solution to problem solving was lodged in his unique ability to upload programming systems knowledge into his brain and allow it to gestate and cross-pollinate at high speeds. Like me, he was also competitive with code. He wanted to be the best. Whatever I knew, he was going to learn it and learn even more. I also thought critically about design. What gameplay patterns, not just technical algorithms, could we make with code? I was fascinated and sometimes awestruck by evolutions in game design, always thinking what a new play pattern or technology might be capable of, not just when it first appeared, but for the future. What could we do with it? We had zero regard for its known horizons. Our strengths were perfectly paired. We were eager to make games do things they had never done before. Looking back, I believe these traits were the essential keys to our future collaborations. His desire to push game tech and my desire to push game design through tech. But the magic, I think, was rooted in our joint understanding of code and trust of each other. Because I was a coder, I knew what was theoretically possible with code and therefore able to push the horizons of game design. I trusted Carmack implicitly. If he said it was possible, it happened. Carmack trusted my design vision. If I said it'd be fun, he trusted that and knew I would make it happen. Great tech without great design is just an interesting exercise. Great design without great tech, or at least the right tech, fails. I'm getting ahead of myself here, but the point I want to make now was that Carmack's growth as a game programmer was breathtaking. It was a lucky thing to have Carmack around in July of 1990 because Big Al came in one day and announced that we would need to launch 2 games on the Gamer's Edge sampler disc, insisting it would lure subscribers. And I need them in 1 month, he added. The sampler disc would be sent to all 50,000 of Big Blue Disc's subscribers. We planned to develop 2 games in 2 months for the sampler as soon as we got the green light to start work. The office had yet to be set up for our team, and we didn't even have the computers we needed to create the games. A month? I thought we had 2 months once you guys were ready. It took them longer to get the publishing work set up, but we'd like to keep that launch date since we have already advertised it to our customers, he said. We absorbed the impact of what this announcement meant. This was not ideal. As far as I was concerned, the company's future was also my only future, at least in the short term. Kelly and I were getting divorced. I knew she was getting increasingly homesick. Shreveport was not for her, and she wanted the support system of her family in California. I could have moved back to California, but even that wouldn't have saved the marriage. During our early separation, we had grown apart. She had become accustomed to a life without me. I had become accustomed to pouring myself into my games and focusing on my career. It was a difficult time for us, but I was determined to care and to provide for them. Fortunately, I knew how to harness my abilities to do that, and kept my mind busy trying to accommodate Big Al's request. The plan, I dubbed it the death schedule, was to work from 10 a.m. to 2 a.m. We realized the quickest solution was for us to repurpose previous work. In 1988, I made an Apple II game that Uptime had published called Dangerous Dave in the Deserted Pirate's Hideout, and I decided to rewrite that for the PC. Meanwhile, Carmack decided to rewrite his Apple II game, Catacomb. As for Lane, he was going to interface with the production team and work on specific assignments that needed to be executed in parallel. There was a kind of competitive aspect to tackling an impossible task, one that, in a sense, defined my work with Carmack. Amped on cans of Coke and fueled by pizza, we did the impossible. We launched ourselves into the unknown, driven by knowledge that no one had done what we were about to do, confident we would come out successful on the other side. With Big Al, we were also driven by inhumanly tight deadlines. In hindsight, we certainly could have said, "No way, Al," but we never even considered it. Our competitive natures caused us to think of it as work-intensive adventure, akin to the greatest adventures in our future D&D campaigns, which required endurance, risk, and suffering, but ultimately ended in triumph. The death schedule had all that and more. Carmack and I didn't look at this as an unreasonable imposition by Big Al. We looked at it as a challenge. With those early grinds, living on the death schedule, we learned a lot about each other, where we had come from and things we'd endured, about how games and coding fit into our lives. Our successes and the interesting places our respective obsessions had taken us as well, like accepting every job that came my way in high school and then working in a sweatshop so I could buy my own Apple IIe after graduation. Carmack had taken his obsession with tech a few steps further than I had, and synthesized information he might have been better off ignoring. When he was 14, he learned that thermite paste could burn through glass. Using this information, he hatched a plan for an Apple II heist. He applied the paste to a window at his high school, removed part of a pane, and crawled into the room. His larger accomplice, however, was unable to fit through the burned-out hole. He sneaked his arm through the gap to unlock and open the window, setting off a silent alarm. They were caught red-handed, and Carmack was sentenced to reformatory school. I had done exceedingly risky, dangerous stuff as a kid, too, including shooting out windows of neighboring homes. What the hell was I thinking? I told him, shooting out the windows of our neighbors' trailers. As far as I could tell, Carmack was reliable. He took on assignments and delivered. We were both proud of each other's work. I had zero reservations about my new friend. In fact, we had nothing but high hopes for what we could do together. I did, however, have questions about my pal Lane. It seemed to me that his head was not in the game. A lot of the disconnect probably had to do with his loathing of the PC, but he was also working as a roadie for a local metal band. Whatever the reason, he just couldn't muster the drive and do what needed to be done. At the start of this project, I assigned Lane a task to write a program to compress some of our files. It wasn't a huge job, but it was a necessary one. I checked in with him on day 10, and he said he hadn't done it. I checked 5 days later, and got the same answer. Finally, Carmack and I finished both our games, and Lane still hadn't written the code. I was steamed. I'll just do it now, Carmack said. 30 minutes later, Carmack was finished. I wanted to get Lane off the Gamer's Edge team and replace him with Tom Hall, who had worked on the Apple II team. I hadn't really worked closely with Tom before, but I had seen him around the office and took an instant liking to him. He was just an incredibly funny, friendly guy, offering up hilarious turns of phrase and game titles. It was also apparent that he was smart. He understood every game reference, was happy to have in-depth discussions on game mechanics, and knew how to code in assembly. As I got to know him, I realized he was probably the most creative person I had ever met. He was a gamer who had finished college and put his programming degree to use by writing tons of games. He understood game design and the elements of games, from character names to sound effects to narrative flow, and had an overactive imagination. My first attempt to draft Tom was nixed by Big Al, but Tom became a regular presence in the Gamer's Edge office anyway. After Carmack and I finished the death schedule with a day or two to spare, we had 2 months to design the next game. We also had a new member, a guy with an easy-to-remember last name, Adrian Carmack. Adrian and John were not related. Adrian, a Shreveport native, was interning in the soft disk art department and earning about $5 an hour. All I knew about him at first was that he had really long hair and seemed about our age. One day, I approached him. "Hey, you listen to metal, right?" "Oh yeah, metal." He was soft-spoken and seemed reserved. "Metallica?" "Yeah, Metallica, Pantera, Slayer." "Cool. Do you want to do some art for computer games?" "Huh? Sure. If my boss says it's okay, then sure." I went to Adrian's boss and told him that Al and I could pick someone from the art department for Gamer's Edge, and Adrian would be joining my department in a month. As it turns out, that turned into a surprising accusation about poaching staff, which I thought was ridiculous because he was an intern, not a full-time staffer. Giving people opportunities to grow is the whole point of an intern program. Thankfully, it got worked out, and I'm glad it did. Adrian had excellent fine art skills, an affection for horror and gore that outstripped my own, and a work ethic that matched ours. He worked his ass off to learn how to create graphics for computers. On the weekends, or when we needed a break, we bonded over Dungeons & Dragons. When Carmack moved from Kansas City, he brought his most prized possession, a huge wooden table. It sat 10 people, and its exclusive purpose was for programming and playing D&D. Right after finishing the sampler disc, Carmack introduced us to his campaign, which he had been running for several years. Carmack was a dungeon master, and Tom, Jay, and I rolled new level 1 characters. Carmack led us through his eerie, dark fantasy world full of demons, mysterious places, ultra-powered beings, political intrigue, and much more. He was an excellent dungeon master and loved crafting campaigns. I admired his abilities to design gameplay for us within the D&D system, which was, at the time, a shadow of what it would eventually become. This was the beginning of a pattern for us that would continue in the future as we grew closer and more united. Make games during the week, and play games on the weekend. The new game we decided to build was called Slordax, a fun space shooter game in the spirit of Xevious. Before we got started, Carmack and I discussed how we could divide up the work. Time was always an issue, and we wanted to work as efficiently as possible. At that point, I was the more experienced game programmer, and Gamer's Edge was my operation. So knowing projects always go better when people are working on what's most interesting to them. I asked him what he was most interested in working on. Carmack said he was really into the architecture of the code and wanted to handle that. He also said he was interested in graphics and wanted to learn more about that. "Fine," I said. "You do that stuff and I'll handle everything else." Everything else, as it turned out, was a lot more work. It's designing the game, which means envisioning the overview of the game. What's the object? What happens? What are the rules? What do players see? What do they do? It's the art direction, planning the levels, writing the tools to make levels, then making the levels. It's producing the game itself, taking all the pieces of the game, text files, image files, sound files, data files, and more, so they can be put on a disk that players can pop into their computer. I was too excited about Slordax to care about the uneven workload. I wanted Carmack to write kick-ass code that pulled all the elements together to make Slordax the fastest, best game around. We wanted players to have a feeling of traveling through space. To do that, we needed the backgrounds to move, smoothly scrolling down the screen as our spaceship flew ahead to give the illusion of flying forward. Creating this effect meant the background images on the screen all had to update and refresh continually, basically 60 times a second. We had to find a way of doing this smoothly the way the NES did it. Considering our options, Carmack and I discussed methods of scrolling vertical backgrounds. One of the most important things I did after that discussion was give Carmack a book I'd bought. It was called Power Graphics Programming, written by Michael Abrash and published that year. I'd only browsed through half of it, but I thought it might be fuel for his knowledge quest. I didn't realize I was putting him directly on the path to game development heaven, but I'd done exactly that. Power Graphics Programming provided the keys to the computer graphics kingdom. Abrash was the first author to unlock the mysteries of something called cathode ray tube control, or CRTC, registration. His book described how programmers altered the location in graphics memory where the CRT started displaying graphics. Changing that value allowed us to simulate scrolling. Beyond the information in Abrash's book, Carmack added his own techniques to make the scrolling even smoother by reducing the amount of drawing he needed to do. He did this by remembering only the areas that needed to be updated and drawing only in those areas instead of the entire screen. Building Slordax and nearing the final stages, Carmack showed me his CRTC experiments. They were extraordinary. I had never seen a computer game with smoother vertical scrolling. This wasn't just moving one line of graphics down the screen to the next line. It was smoothly scrolling at a hardware level like the NES. Gamer's Edge was going to shock the industry with this. I told John this was terrific, but I knew the real win wasn't a smooth vertical scroll, but instead a smooth, limitless horizontal scroll. The world loved Super Mario Bros. I loved Super Mario Bros. Action games depended on smooth movement, and gaming systems like the one Nintendo created to run Super Mario Bros. Had the computing power to shed the static screen. New backgrounds unspooled seamlessly behind a character as they moved, or in Mario's case, bounced to the left or the right. I believe that horizontal scrolling was a key to visual storytelling, expanding the player's world around them. I knew matching the smooth scrolling of dedicated gaming systems would revolutionize PC games. I didn't explain my thinking to Carmack then. I just tossed off the comment. As he worked on vertical scrolling, I just wanted him to keep horizontal scrolling in mind. Both of us like to work toward challenges. Slordax was a total team effort. Tom Hall came up with the name, wrote the story, created half the levels, and had suggestions for what some of the enemies might look like. Adrian did a great job creating all the art for the game, except for the title screen, which, as you will soon see, was a big oversight. I designed the game, programmed and designed the level editor, created the other half of the levels, created the audio for the game, handled the production of everything that shipped with the game, and made sure it was going to fit on a 1.44 megabyte disk. It was our first game as a team, and everyone felt we worked well together. At the last stage of development, Carmack contacted the art department, which always created the title screen that appeared to be the beginning of every soft disk game, in this case a purple planet and futuristic green lettering announcing Slordax, the Unknown Enemy by John Carmack. Copyright 1991, Soft Disk Inc. When the disc arrived in November 1990, we were all shocked to see Carmack with the solo credit. Since Carmack had made the request, the art department designers just assumed he was the only author. We were all so busy getting it ready to go out the door that none of us noticed. I created the final master disc, which was locked and loaded in 1990, not 1991, contrary to the date on the title screen. That's when it got into subscribers' hands, but it was finished the previous year. Shipping Slordax, our first game as a team, was a monumental occasion, but it was not the most monumental thing to happen during this time. Not by a long shot. During the development of Slordax, John Carmack took my challenge to heart. He dove deeper into power graphics programming and his own genius. Then, we made gaming history. Chapter 9. Lightning Strikes. I was speechless. I know that may be hard to believe. I talk passionately about games to anyone who listens, whether it is about programming techniques, upcoming games and consoles, or the latest game I am into. Softdisk even had a conversational atmosphere. Still, on September 20th, 1990, I was at a total loss for words. But my silence wasn't the real story. The reason for my silence, that was the real story. In the space of about 1 second, at the age of almost 23, I had glimpsed my future, my colleagues' future, and the future of PC gaming, and that future was phenomenal. Moments before losing my capacity to utter a single word, I had arrived early to an empty Gamer's Edge office to find a 3.5-inch floppy disk on my keyboard, with a note from Tom instructing me to run the program on the disk. I inserted the floppy. I was greeted with a brown title screen announcing Dangerous Dave and copyright infringement. One side of the screen had a circular portrait of Dangerous Dave, a character I had created a couple of years earlier, in his signature red baseball cap. The other side had a portrait of a judge, bedecked in a powdered wig, holding up a gavel. I took in the image and wondered how Dave was going to interact with the halls of justice. I had no clue where this was going. I hit the spacebar and got the shock of my life. A familiar video game lit up my PC screen. I was looking at a replica of Super Mario Bros. 3. The billowing white cloud characters, the green shrubs, the construction blocks, and rotating gold coins. But Super Mario didn't exist on the PC, because the technology that powered it didn't exist on the PC. It existed only on the Nintendo Entertainment System and a couple of the 80s' best computers, like the Atari 800 and the Commodore 64. These systems had the custom chips to handle two-dimensional side-scrolling. PC games, due to a dearth of graphics support and processing power, had been restricted to static screen games and chunky scrolling, until Carmack created smooth vertical scrolling just a few days earlier with Slordax. Now I looked at Super Mario Bros.' Mushroom Kingdom and wondered what it was doing on my PC screen. I also noticed Dangerous Dave standing at the bottom of the screen. The character I created 2 years earlier, who was inspired by Super Mario Bros., was now inhabiting the Mushroom Kingdom. I laughed. That was the copyright violation of the title, but how far did this parody go? I hit the arrow key to move Dangerous Dave and found out. What I saw destroyed me. The scenery on screen was changing, moving. As Dave walked and bounced his way into the game, moving right, new scenery and new challenges emerged. Everything scrolled smoothly, seamlessly, continually to the left. I hit the direction keys, moving him back and forth and up and down. As much as it looked like I was playing, I wasn't. I was processing the enormity of what I saw. You know how in Star Wars, when the Millennium Falcon goes into warp speed and the stars start whizzing by? That's how I felt, teleported into the future. I had to stop and process what I had just witnessed, what Carmack had done. I was sure Tom had done the nuts and bolts recreation of Super Mario Bros. 3's Gamescape, which was funny and cool, but the horizontal scrolling that knocked me out, that was clearly all Carmack. The two of them had created this little program as a joke, as a fun way to tell me that Carmack had figured out a cool programming trick that he took on my challenge and delivered. Only this wasn't just a cool trick. This was a revolution. For me, the implications of horizontal scrolling were so vast it was hard to fathom. I saw the entire universe of PC gaming expand in that split second. Horizons were no longer finite, no longer limited to the fixed dimensions of a computer screen. I had been immersed in the PC game market for a good 2 years now. My goal had been to understand every game, all the technology, all the programming tools. I had immersed myself in the PC because I needed to know where the leading edge was. When I saw Dangerous Dave moving effortlessly to the right, I knew the leading edge was right before my eyes. I mean this quite literally. I knew what I witnessed, and I knew this was our future. Ironically, Carmack and Tom didn't. I knew what part of the video hardware Carmack had to use to create the side-scrolling effect, but he had figured out another optimization that reused background graphics so that the PC could read, render, and react with maximum efficiency. Remember that processing power and available memory were a fraction of what's standard today? Carmack had created a rendering engine that rewrote the rules of the game, of all games, and yet he didn't realize it. In fairness, nobody else did either. After about 30 minutes of sitting there in silence, I finally got my act together and decided to show a few people this revolutionary breakthrough. I took the floppy disk down the hall to my friends at Big Blue Disc, booted it up, and waited for people to try it out. That's really neat. Nice. How funny. That's cool. I couldn't believe it. I was waving a paradigm-shifting demo before their eyes, and they couldn't see it. In the world of programming, Dangerous Dave in copyright infringement was like a coding version of the Rosetta Stone. It's like E equals MC squared. It was like nuclear fusion. Instead, they told me it was neat. This surprised me even more. Are you serious? Neat? This is incredible, I said. It was all I could do not to go on a rant. These were people who lived and breathed computer programming, who understood and were invested in the PC revolution. They should have been saying, "That is fucking amazing." The ability to program games that move so smoothly on the horizontal axis within the game world was earth-shattering technology. It meant we could write games for the PC that rivaled the games created for gaming systems like Nintendo, Sega, and Atari without the need for all their specialized hardware. Players didn't need to invest in a new console. All they needed was a PC and the game files. Nowadays, this is what venture capitalists mean when they talk about disruption. When Dangerous Dave moved, he wasn't just moving right in pursuit of the gold coins of Mario's Kingdom. He was stepping into a completely new future for PC computer gaming, and we were going to step in with him. Not just into a new technological and gameplay standard, but into entirely new lives. I knew right then that we were going to make groundbreaking games. We were going to be the team to follow, like Wozniak, like Nasir, like Budge, like my game dev heroes. We were going to build our own game company. I walked around with that disk, the actual leading edge, thinking about all the new dimensions this programming capability would open up. I saw untapped possibilities on the horizon. There was the obvious universe of porting the offerings of Nintendo, Atari, and Sega to the PC. We also wanted to make new games. That was always the goal, to create games that we loved playing, that challenged us. Carmack knew he had broken the fourth wall of gaming on PCs. He had defied programming gravity. But he didn't care about the business implications of his triumph. The programming achievement was all that mattered. Giving Carmack the runway an opportunity to laser focus on code and nothing but code, specifically the EGA adapter, paid off, and we were just beginning to discover how our individual sets of unique traits worked with, challenged, and celebrated each other. If I stated an achievable design or technical goal as a challenge, like smooth horizontal scrolling, he enjoyed and happily took on the challenge of solving it. I was the design/code yin to his engineering yang, and I had the programming knowledge to know what I was suggesting was certainly possible. As a team, we didn't just work well together, we propelled each other. I was obsessed with pushing the boundaries of design. He was called to push the boundaries of code. We had the vision and the goals to see beyond the current industry horizons. Achieving those goals meant solving tricky game design, computing, and graphics problems. Despite his gaming genius, Carmack wasn't that interested in advancing game design. The mechanics, the player progression, the narratives, the environment design, the sound, the surprises, and the Easter eggs. And quite often he didn't think about the limitations that needed to be conquered until we presented them to him. That's not to say he didn't care about design at all. He cared deeply about the design and the architecture of code, and games were at the frontier. Because of the kind of programming that goes into games, they were, and still are, the most taxing form of programming. You can use a computer to crunch a bunch of numbers, sure, but spreadsheets don't generally need sound cards and GPUs, or graphics processing units. Games require the whole of a computer to immerse a player in an experience, and game developers push computers to do interesting, fun, and innovative tasks, and it drives hardware innovation. I thought Tom Hall would see it. Unlike Carmack, Tom loved games and game design. He loved the narrative, the journey. He didn't really give a damn about computer languages or rendering issues, although he had good programming skills. He was about flights of fancy and having fun. If I had to bet, I would have wagered that he understood the importance of side-scrolling beyond the amusing copyright infringement demo he had meticulously created, but I would have lost that bet. They had stayed up late into the night to create the demo, and when Tom finally showed up for work that afternoon, he was eager to see my reaction. I was equally eager to see if he knew what they had done. "Cool, right?" Tom said with a laugh. As for Carmack, I found out he called part of his innovation adaptive tile refresh. He didn't see it as anything to shout Eureka about. I suspect he viewed the inability to side-scroll on PCs as a functional programming and graphics conundrum. It seemed to me that they had missed the forest for the trees, both of them. I was still in awe. "This is massive," I told them. "Revolutionary. This is it. We are gone." I was elated and nervous at the same time. I never doubted my analysis or my vision of what side-scrolling meant, not for 1 second, but the implications, the opportunities that loomed as a result of that conclusion were non-trivial. A tremendous, unique opportunity can also be a daunting opportunity. I wanted to make no missteps. Everything had to be exactly right. Now, I regretted sharing it with a few people in the office. Even giving them a glimpse of the golden ticket was stupid. I didn't want the enormity of this discovery to get out. I realized I needed to be clear with Carmack, Tom, Adrian, Lane, and Jay. We now had the opportunity to do something that was too big for SoftDisk. It wasn't even a part of SoftDisk's business model. I put the disk back into the drive and let it fly, lifting my voice over the beeps and blurts of the soundscape Tom had assembled. This is the coolest fucking thing ever. We need to get out of here. This is our ticket. Jay Wilbur, the guy who had known me longer than anyone else at the company, walked by our office door as I was talking. "Hey, what's up, guys?" he said. "Jay, you saw the demo, right?" I said. "Yeah, it's really cool." "Dude, it's beyond cool. It's we're out of here cool is what it is." Jay snorted at this as if he had thought I was just spouting off, hyping something up, which he'd seen me do dozens of times in the 4 years we'd known each other. "I'm dead serious, Jay." He must have heard the commitment in my voice and concluded I was not blowing smoke because he closed the door. I laid out my vision. We have to get out of here. That's the plan. We're going to keep working together and we can totally make some unbelievable games, but we need to get out of here. Side-scrolling means we can create PC games that rival the games of the biggest selling video game companies in the world. We have the perfect team right here in this room. We need to refine this and develop our own games for PC. If we do, they will be superior to every single PC game out there. Think about it. There is not a single game on PC that lets you move like this, and the market for PCs is exploding. We can do this. We have to do this. Everyone heard me loud and clear. It made sense. Jay believed something big was happening too. "This is what I think," he said. "We need to take this to Nintendo right now. Straight to the guys at the top and get a deal to port it to PC. Then we are talking serious money that can fund other development." It was the obvious play, the one I thought of instantly when my head was exploding with ideas. Now Jay had expressed it and confirmed my thoughts. Everyone was on board. We just had to figure out how and when to do what needed to be done. Continuing to work for SoftDisk, we went into heavy stealth mode with our new tech. We were all work all the time, with only sporadic breaks to play Super Mario Bros. 3, Life Force, or The Legend of Zelda. Carmack, Jay, and Lane found a perfect house on the shores of Cross Lake, Shreveport's massive man-made lake that serves as a water sports hub for the area. This meant we had a workspace away from SoftDisk where we could jam 24/7 if need be, and focus on our work. We had only one problem. We didn't own PCs. At the time, we were still living on modest salaries, and since I had to send money to Kelly and the kids, I really had to live on the cheap. Our solution? We borrowed PCs from SoftDisk. When our workday ended at 6 p.m., we stayed in the office, changed directories, and started on our other project. We spent an entire week of after-hours work churning out a 2-level PC demo of Super Mario Bros. 3. We even videotaped the original game so we could be sure our demo captured every single pixel. On Friday evenings, we pulled our cars up to the SoftDisk office and quickly and quietly removed our PCs, packing them into our cars. With Jay grilling food and feeding us, Carmack and I programmed in the living room while Tom and Lane handled graphics and enemy AI, how enemies made decisions and acted upon those decisions, on other PCs we'd eventually bought. Adrian, who worked with us on Gamer's Edge, wasn't a part of this initial stealth mode team. We had yet to get to know Adrian well. He was relatively new, and Tom planned to handle the art for the demo. The sense of urgency and excitement among the team was palpable. We had the ability to execute the right idea at the right time. For years to come, this was our strength. There is nothing more fun than making games when you have a solid direction, an experienced team, and the knowledge that you are ahead of the competition. With our mission complete, Jay sent our demo to Nintendo with a request to let us develop the game for PC. 3 weeks later, Nintendo turned us down. They wanted to keep their intellectual property exclusive to their proprietary system. This, of course, made perfect sense, even if it didn't initially work in our favor. Fortunately, I stumbled onto a terrific plan B while making the Super Mario Bros. 3 demo. I had gotten plenty of mail from gamers over the years, especially when I was publishing games in Insider and Nibble. Some of them were people having difficulty typing in the source code of my games from magazines, and some were complimentary. Since I'd arrived at Softdisk, though, my work wasn't exactly front and center. The discs we mailed out every month didn't have my address on them, so I was surprised when I started getting fan letters sent to me via Softdisk. When the first one came, from somebody named Scott Moulier, I pretended to make a big deal of it, showing it off like I was somebody's idol, but obviously, I was honored. Scott loved my game and pronounced me very talented and himself a big fan. As a game developer, particularly in the 1980s and the early 1990s, it was rare to have any kind of fan interaction, and so I was grateful that people played my games and liked them enough to write me. Behind the barricades at Softdisk, mail was exceedingly rare. In fact, some companies, wary of talent being poached, made it hard to reach programmers. A few more fan mails followed Scott's letter. Some of them asked me to write back or even call collect. I taped them on the wall near my PC, but I didn't give them too much thought. Since I was so busy, I didn't feel the urge to write back. Right around this time, I read a story in PC Games magazine about a new game distribution model that was paying off for a guy in Texas named Scott Miller. The article mentioned his address on Mayflower Drive in Garland, Texas. That rang some bells. Who did I know in Garland, Texas? I racked my brain and then glanced at the letters on my wall. Every one of them was from Garland. Every one of them had the exact same address. Every one of them was from an allegedly different guy. What the hell was going on? Who was sending me these letters? How the hell had I not noticed this before? I didn't understand what his problem was. Was he a freak? A stalker? A practical joker? Was he trolling me? I immediately wrote him a long, nasty response, but I cooled off and reread the letters on the wall, noting the invite to call collect and make contact. Bizarre, for sure, but he must have had a motive behind his madness. So I enclosed another letter along with my more reactionary first letter, telling him that I was mildly intrigued by his strange method of making an approach. I included the phone number at Softdisk where he could reach me. Soon after that, he got in touch. "Oh my God, finally! John Romero," he said when I picked up the phone. "Who is this?" "Scott Miller. We so need to work together." I thought of saying some of the nastier things I wrote in my first letter, but settled on something less confrontational. "Dude, what was with those letters you wrote me? All those different names. It's unbelievable. Can you..." "Never mind the letters. I had to write that way to make sure they got to you. It's hard to make contact with programmers, but forget all that. What I really want to do is talk to you about making games for me." After that, he backed up and we got on track. He told me his story, focusing primarily on the new company he created, Apogee, and how he had solved the computer gaming distribution puzzle, a challenge for any independent game startup, with a disk and BBS-based grassroots solution. He didn't exactly put it in those terms, but that is what it amounted to. In the fall of 1990, there was no Steam, Epic Game Store, or online app store. If you wanted the latest games, you ordered them via mail order, or you went to similar retailers like Electronics Boutique, Computerland, Egghead, or Software, etc. If you were lucky enough to have any one of those in your town. In bigger cities, everyone who wanted games went to large computer stores like CompUSA or Babbage's, found the games section, and bought what are now called big box games off the shelf. The managers of these outlets organized the games by genre, and in doing so, organized the industry by genre too. The world of downloading games online was in its infancy on BBSs, but was gaining popularity. Scott had adapted the shareware model, where developers made applications or games available for free download and hoped users would appreciate their work and send them money in return. Scott had been writing games since he was a teenager, mostly text-based quiz and adventure games. Instead of giving the whole game away, Scott decided to post a sample version of a game on bulletin boards and Usenet groups. The idea was to hook users and then make them pay for the complete version. When they finished the free sample, a screen popped up with Scott's address and instructions to buy the rest of the game from him. He said he was making a fortune, Thousands of dollars a week on a roguelike game called Croz, a game mentioned in the PC Games article. He gave away the first episode of the game, Kingdom of Croz, and the thousands were coming from people who wanted to complete the trilogy with Caverns of Croz and Dungeons of Croz. He'd even given the first episode away on Big Blue Disc number 20, but that was before I got to soft disc. The reason he wrote me those letters, he told me, was that he wanted me to make a clone of Pyramids of Egypt for Apogee. It's a perfect shareware game and will sell like crazy. We can't do that. Soft Disc owns Pyramids, Scott. But I saw an opening for our stealth plans and went for it. You wouldn't want Pyramids anyway. We've got something way better. You have no idea how cool our current game is, I told him. It is light years cooler than Pyramids. I'll send you a sample. You've never seen anything like it on the PC. Then I want to sell it. I loved what I was hearing. Even if Nintendo rejected our PC port of Super Mario Bros. 3, this was a potential solution for taking our breakthrough to the next level. If Scott was making money hand over fist, so could we. At Softdisk, we were all salaried employees. No matter how well our games did, we got paid our set amount, and there's one thing for sure, it wasn't thousands of dollars a week. I told Carmack about Scott Miller the previous week after piecing together his multiple letters, and he knew I had given Scott our number. After the call, I came back into our Gamer's Edge office and shared the details with Carmack, who seemed slightly interested but skeptical. I was stoked, though, and sent Scott the demo straight away. He was impressed when he saw our work. He got it, understood its potential, and called me immediately. I need you guys to make a new game with this tech. Making an additional game for Scott was exactly the opportunity we had been looking for. I felt like Carmack's breakthrough, which had come long after business hours in the Softdisk office, and the plans to capitalize on it were ours, collectively, to use. Carmack and Tom worked on their own time, nearly to dawn, to make their extraordinary Dangerous Dave demo, and I knew side-scrolling was a game-changer before I started Gamer's Edge. Though all the ingredients had come together here, they had come together on our own time. Yet, excited as we were to charge ahead, we had our day jobs and were currently developing Slordax for Gamer's Edge. In my opinion, using groundbreaking horizontal scrolling for a Gamer's Edge release was a waste of an opportunity. The entire company's business model was not suited to capitalize and promote the kind of hot-selling and groundbreaking games we could now build. At this point, we had to make a big decision. Do we stay or do we go? In the end, we decided to do both. We worked at Softdisk by day and created our future at night. Eager to get going, we needed a name for our new company. We had named our little D&D team In Demand as a joke. We were level 3 peons and no one ever needed us, but IDF, Ideas from the Deep, and the moniker ID for In Demand seemed destined to stick to us, so Tom suggested we go with id. It was a Freudian term and described the primitive instinctual part of the mind, a way that we hoped our games would connect with players. We decided to add software to it. Looking back, we could have used entertainment, studios, games, or something else more interesting than software. But that's what most companies did back then. I often hear people pronounce id as ID, but that's not correct. It's id and rhymes with did. After the Super Mario Bros. 3 demo, we decided to part ways with Lane. It seemed to us that the PC was not for him, which doesn't work in a PC game company. We decided to leave him out. Also, Lane didn't play in our D&D group. Eventually, Scott laid out our terms of a deal. Our team would make a 45% royalty on every copy sold. To cement the deal, I asked Scott for a $2,000 advance. When the check came in the mail, it proved to me and the team that this was a real deal. The $2,000 worked out to be $666 per person. We would have started making the game for Scott without it, but getting this advance showed us Scott was serious and believed in us. We did some rough math to determine what kind of company we might bring in if our game did well. As long as we made enough to pay rent 2 times per person, we knew it was enough to do this full-time thing on our own. For the time being, though, we continued our day jobs working on Slordax for Softdisk. The 3-game component of the Apogee model, first game goes out for free and if players like it, they buy the other 2, was critical, and we held a quick meeting to figure out a plan. Okay, does anyone have an idea for a trilogy? I asked. Carmack said, how about a genius kid who saves the world and his parents are oblivious to it? Tom Hall loved it and said he'd be back in 10 minutes. He ran to his Apple II GS, fired up AppleWorks, and banged out a 3-paragraph overview about Billy Blaze, an 8-year-old genius who builds a rocket, dons a football helmet, and jets off to Mars. 15 minutes later, he returned to read the initial Defender of Justice paragraph aloud to us in a Walter Winchell voice. Carmack applauded. I loved it too. It was an amalgam of Tom's passions: punny, subtle, often kitschy humor, a love of science fiction, an awareness of being a kid, and his vast game knowledge. As he got deeper into developing the idea, he came up with a design for a secret level and other Easter egg type treats, like having signs written in the standard galactic alphabet, Tom's futuristic cipher for the English alphabet, all over the place. Curious gamers could even decipher the alphabet and translate the signs. The game was called Commander Keen in Invasion of the Vorticons. The name and the idea itself had just come out of thin air, on demand. Tom was like that, and he still is. I have never known anyone as intensely creative as Tom Hall. Give him an idea, go get a coffee, and when you come back, he has your universe created. Tom later told me that the name was inspired by old movie serial names like Buck Rogers in the 25th Century and Flash Gordon and the Planet of Death. The drive to build it before Christmas was epic. Carmack and I spent 16 hours a day together, pushing each other, inspiring each other. The first 8 hours were on Slordax, the second 8 were on Commander Keen. Tom wasn't far behind. Adrian still wasn't a part of id Software at this time, so his focus was solely on Slordax. Tom did all the graphics for the first Keen trilogy, and we brought Adrian in at the end to create some graphics tiles and the Vorta Ninja enemy that players would encounter in episodes 2 and 3. When Adrian left the office for the day, Tom came in, and we began to work on Keen. I continued coding tools and other parts of the game, such as the world map, menu system, secret Loch Ness monster transport, and other touches like that. John spent his time coding enemy AI, and Tom and I made the game's levels. Tom created an entire universe, and these first 3 games were just a glimpse into it. There were alien races and tons of creatures with their own backstories. Each of the Keen games had 16 levels, so we made 48 levels in total. These levels were exciting to make. They were the first levels we made that felt like we were crafting an adventure that was meant to excite, to surprise, and to provoke curiosity in the player. We hid secrets everywhere, and we made sure the game was challenging, but not too difficult. As we worked, Scott Miller would send us $100 checks just before the weekends with pizza money noted on them. Once again, we were on a 10-2 death schedule. In hindsight, I know the schedule sounds nuts, and the fact that we did this to ourselves may seem even nuttier, but at the time this didn't at all feel like work. We were chasing greatness, and we ran as fast as we could. We knew someone would get to the finish line, and we wanted to get there first. We finished Slordax for Gamer's Edge on October 31st and started on our next game for them the day after. We decided to make a ninja action game and called it Shadow Knights. We used the Keen scrolling tech for this game, making it the first Gamer's Edge game to horizontally scroll. Working with this code during the day made our evening work on Keen that much easier. Though we were challenging ourselves and working around the clock, I still stopped now and again to talk with Beth McCall, a woman who worked on the production line putting discs in mailers and to send out to Softdisk's many subscribers. She had a calm and easygoing demeanor, a thick southern accent, and a pleasant laugh. Whenever we'd bump into one another, she'd ask about what we were working on. Like a person who had spent a good portion of their life behind a monitor, I launched into answers with technical details, and seeing as I was speaking only to myself, followed up with gameplay details. I don't play games, she told me. She rolled her eyes in mock anticipation of my response. Everyone plays games, I said. There just might not be a game for them yet. I believed what I said. I had been in the industry long enough to see the incredible breadth of games that developers had created, and I knew that there was still so much ground to cover. Maybe so, she told me, but I knew that she was speaking more from politeness than hope of finding that perfect game for her. I enjoyed our conversations and decided to ask her if she'd like to go on a date with me. Since she knew how committed I was to my job and to my growth as a game creator, she saw firsthand how hard our group worked. I wasn't worried that it would become an issue and kept on with our development schedule. On December 12th, we finished the Commander Keen trilogy. While the rest of the team got some sleep, I brought the disc to the post office and sent it off in the mail. Scott got it 2 days later, and Apogee released the free first episode of the game, Marooned on Mars, that day. Scott uploaded episode 1 to Dan Linton's popular gaming BBS, Software Creations, in Clinton, Massachusetts. Dan created a big text banner with the name Commander Keen crafted from a block of ASCII art symbols, which everyone saw as soon as they logged in. Players could buy the remaining 2 episodes, The Earth Explodes and Keen Must Die, for $30. The response was immediate and remarkable. The first month, Apogee generated about $25,000 in sales, the vast majority of it from Keen purchases, all with zero advertising. Just as gratifying was the feedback from gamers. When journalists pin obituaries about id Software team members, Doom and Quake will be name-checked in the first paragraph, along with first-person shooter games. Commander Keen may be just a footnote, a passing paragraph in the inventory of our work, but if you look back at the reviews of Commander Keen, Invasion of the Vorticons, the critical acclaim was every bit as breathless and loving as the response was to Doom. Accolades abounded. PC Magazine said it has a Nintendo feel and was a tremendous success, while PC Computing wrote, Commander Keen's a revolutionary game and design. Commander Keen's standard-setting quality has made addiction all too easy. Commander Keen was a revolutionary game and design that took advantage of never-before-seen PC programming techniques. We'd set out to astonish everyone, and we did. On January 15, 1991, our first check arrived in the amount of $10,500. We had more than hit our team budget requirement of 2 times our rent per person. None of us had ever held a check for an amount that large. We passed it around in wonder. We had made it. Partially, anyway. I went to see Al Vicovius to tell him Carmack, Tom, and I were leaving, and Adrian was coming with us. I know this is not an ideal situation, I said, and I'm totally grateful for everything you've done, but the soft disk model isn't going to work for us. Once again, Al surprised me, insisting we can work something out. I have to say, part of me was relieved. Tom was worried about getting sued by Softdisk. I had downplayed that concern with logic. What can they sue us for? We don't have any money. What's he going to take from you, Tom? Your couch with a spring popping out of it? Instead, Al had collaboration, not legal action, on his mind. How about I work with you guys to make your own company? I'll own a piece of it, but you'll own the rest. We'll be partners, and I can manage all the business aspects of it. You can be whatever you want to be. On the surface, this sounded good. No potential legal hassles, we wouldn't have to deal with business issues, and we could make games that use the shareware model, which seemed far more profitable and liberating than Softdisk's subscription model. As we hashed this out, Al was thinking on his feet. His plan was to move some of the programmers who handle his cash cow, Big Blue Disk, to take over Gamer's Edge, as they were the only other PC programmers in the company. We would help train them and then spend all our time making games for this new Al and Us company. This sounded like a great plan, and we were seriously considering it, but Al had concerns, saying, I have to have a meeting with the other editors about this. Everyone's going to find out about it. The next day, the deal was off. His staff had threatened to quit. From their perspective, Al was rewarding us for screwing over the company, for using Softdisk to build our careers. Meanwhile, they were going to get shafted with more work. I can't do it. They said they will all quit, and then I'm really screwed. Eventually, after some civil negotiation, we agreed that in return for Softdisk not suing us for making claims to our intellectual property, we would spend the next year making a game every 2 months for Softdisk, while their new Gamer's Edge team trained themselves to use our code and tools. He offered to pay us $5,000 for each game. We took that deal quickly. Living in Shreveport, our living expenses were about $400 a month each, so with the money coming in from Keen, we'd have no cash flow issues at all. We would still have to code like maniacs, but in the end, we would be beholden to nobody. Apogee was ready and waiting for our next project. Before I leave the Softdisk era behind, I want to address a few things. A great deal has been written about this period. Our time at Softdisk, John Carmack's horizontal scrolling breakthrough, and the creation of Commander Keen. Most of it jibes with my version of events. I have, however, seen some reporting that overstates the group's creative tensions and personality clashes. I realized this was a dramatic device that obviously added tension to our story, but at the outset, we were unified and in sync. Suggestions that John Carmack was reclusive and antisocial were not at all evident in the first few years. Yes, he had a superhuman work ethic and was brilliant, but he was a regular guy like me, and nobody spent more time with him than I did. As for tensions that existed among the rest of the team, I can't speak for the inner feelings of everyone, but we were as high functioning and collaborative and positive as it gets. It was a dream team of motivated, talented game developers. Once, I read a report that Adrian Carmack truly loathed Tom Hall. He absolutely didn't. As I've said, none of us smoked, drank regularly, or did drugs, and I think this speaks to just how in sync and focused we were, but there was one night, New Year's Eve 1990, where some of us got drunk and Carmack famously stated, "I am losing control of my faculties." He normally did not talk like a computer, but apparently the drinking caused him to. I think we would have been turned off if someone lit up a joint or started doing shots. We got high on games and programming. That was it. I've also read similar reports that I didn't like Al Vacovius. On the contrary, I thought Al was a great guy, and so did the others. We were happy to have jobs at Softdisk. The statement itself was attributed to John Carmack, a statement Carmack disputes as untrue and out of character. Why would I dislike the guy who gave me a chance to learn the PC? Everything he did for us was always positive. There was zero negativity from me, or any of us, toward Al, as far as I knew. I consider Al Vacovius a major and helpful figure in my life and the history of video games.